El Inventario Forestal y de Suelos, INFIS, es un instrumento de política nacional que genera información precisa y actualizada sobre la cuantía, ubicación y condiciones de los recursos forestales que existen en México. Esta información se utiliza para sustentar el diseño y la evaluación de las políticas públicas de alcance nacional en el sector forestal, y tiene carácter oficial y uso obligatorio para la Federación, estados y municipios. El inventario se actualiza cada 5 años mediante brigadas especializadas en más de 26,000 conglomerados de muestreo, ubicados en todos los ecosistemas del país. La CONAFOR, reconociendo la experiencia y el conocimiento tradicional de los ejidos forestales de nuestro país, a partir del año 2023, dio inicio a la implementación del proyecto de monitoreo forestal comunitario para realizar la colecta de datos de campo. Bajo este enfoque participativo, se contrata a ejidos y comunidades forestales para que sus brigadas realicen el muestreo, previa capacitación. El acompañamiento y la supervisión técnica garantizan que la colecta de datos se realice conforme a los estándares de calidad requeridos para una información confiable. Este proyecto tiene por objetivos: empoderar a ejidos y comunidades en el monitoreo de sus recursos forestales, apoyar el desarrollo de capacidades técnicas para el levantamiento de datos de campo, proveer a los núcleos agrarios de herramientas adaptables y de uso autónomo, canalizar inversiones para el levantamiento de datos de campo y favorecer la creación de fuentes de empleo cuyos ingresos se quedan en los núcleos agrarios. Por otra parte, la participación de los ejidos y comunidades forestales en la colecta de datos tiene como ventajas: amplía el conocimiento de sus propias áreas forestales, con lo cual disminuyen los tiempos de traslado y los problemas de logística. Incrementa la pertenencia de los núcleos agrarios con sus recursos forestales. Disminuye costos para la colecta de datos de campo. Al principio se identificaron los núcleos agrarios con capacidades técnicas y experiencia en el manejo y aprovechamiento sustentable de sus ecosistemas forestales. Y para asegurar la calidad de la información, personal técnico de la CONAFOR capacitó a las brigadas comunitarias con el fin de estandarizar los criterios para realizar la colecta de datos de campo, así como verificar el uso adecuado del equipo técnico necesario. Adicionalmente, las brigadas comunitarias fueron capacitadas en el registro de datos de campo en dispositivos móviles mediante la aplicación INFIS Móvil, elaborado por la propia CONAFOR, con base en herramientas de código abierto desarrolladas por la FAO. Así, estas brigadas colectan información general sobre la ubicación y condiciones generales de los conglomerados, así como datos sobre el arbolado y la vegetación de los estratos herbáceos y arbustivos, el estado de la regeneración, la diversidad de las especies forestales, la existencia de material leñoso, la condición de los suelos, sanidad e impactos ambientales, entre otros. Posteriormente, esta información permite estimar los indicadores para un mejor conocimiento del estado de los recursos forestales, entre los que destacan los tipos de vegetación, volumen, biomasa y acervos de carbono en las principales formaciones forestales.
Es interesante y significa que estamos contribuyendo más en el inventario nacional.
A nosotros se nos hace muy importante, ya que estamos remediando la vegetación que tenemos ahorita en nuestro estado, y checar realmente qué es lo que está pasando, ya que es remedición, a ver si están incrementando los volúmenes o están bajando los volúmenes de lo que tenemos.
Significa un logro, más que nada, y porque pues nunca se había hecho un inventario nacional elegido por personas de aquí mismo del ejido.
Estoy ejerciendo mi carrera como ingeniera, pues es una oportunidad de trabajo para seguir superándome y pues sí, agarrar experiencia sobre el ámbito.
A casi un año de la exitosa instrumentación de este proyecto, el enfoque de monitoreo forestal comunitario genera información de calidad con bases científicas y contribuye a la toma informada de decisiones en los procesos de diseño, instrumentación y evaluación de políticas públicas en el sector forestal de México.
Comisión Nacional Forestal.
Gobierno de México. Buenos días para todos y todas.
Good morning,
Bienvenidos a
everyone.
un
Welcome
virtual de
to
intercambio
this
de
virtual meeting
experiencias
for
sobre
sharing
métodos
experiences
innovadores
on
de
innovative methods
recopilación
for
de datos
collecting
de
national
inventarios
forest
forestales
inventory data
nacionales con
with
participación local.
local community
Este evento
involvement.
es
Now, this
organizado
event is
por
organized
CONAFOR con el
by
apoyo de la
CONAFOR with the
FAO en el
support of
marco de la
FAO
Red de Inventarios
within the
Forestales
framework
Nacionales
of the
para la
National
región
Network,
Latinoamérica y el
Forest Inventory
Caribe,
Network for the
presidida por
Caribbean,
México.
led by
Antes
Mexico.
de
Now,
comenzar,
before
les
we actually get
informamos que
started,
tenemos
we inform that we
interpretación
have to
simultánea.
have simultaneous
Para los que están en
interpretation.
Zoom,
For
pueden
those of you
buscar
in
el
Zoom,
icono
you
en
can
el globo.
actually
Les
look for the
recomiendo
icon
que
at the bottom of
aquellos
the
que
screen.
tengan
I recommend that
preguntas
those
puedan
who
ir
have questions
haciéndolas
can
en el
actually
chat.
formulate
Nuestro
your
equipo estará
questions in the chat.
recogiéndolas y
Our team will
tendremos
be
un breve
collecting
espacio
these
para
questions that we have a
responderlas
brief
al
space
final del
to
evento.
respond at the very end of the event.
Espero que esta sesión sea muy
I hope this
enriquecedora
event
y que
is
les brinde valiosas
very enriching
perspectivas
and
sobre
provide
las
very
experiencias de los
beneficial
países
perspective on the experiences
participantes
from the
para que
participating
puedan tener
countries
elementos
so you can have
para la implementación
elements
de
for
nuevos
the
enfoques
implementation
para
of
la
new
colecta de datos
focuses
de campo del
for
Inventario Forestal Nacional con la
national forest
participación
inventory
de
data collection with the
comunidades u
participation of
organizaciones
communities
locales.
who are
Para
local
dar
organizations.
inicio a
Now,
nuestra
to actually
reunión
start with
virtual,
our meeting,
doy paso a las
I
palabras
pass
del
the floor
director
to the
general de
General
CONAFOR
Director
para
of
la
CONAFOR
instalación del evento.
for his opening remarks.
Sí, sí escuchan. Es para mí un honor darles las
Now, for
más,
me,
la
it's an
más
honor
cordial
to
bienvenida a este
actually
importante
welcome
seminario
everyone to this very
en
important
línea
seminar
a los representantes que
aligned
conforman
to
la
the
red de
representatives
inventarios
that
forestales de América
conform
Latina y
the
el Caribe,
Latin American and
la personal de
Caribbean
la FAO
National Forest
y a mis
Inventory
colegas
Networks,
forestales y al
FAO, and
público en
my
general.
forest colleagues and public in general.
Este encuentro es un
Now, this
espacio para
gathering is a
compartir
space to
conocimientos
actually
y
share
experiencias
knowledge and
sobre la
experiences
participación de
on
las
the
comunidades
participation
locales
of the local
en la
communities
colecta de datos de inventarios
in the
forestales
collection of
nacionales.
national forest data.
Este espacio no solo
Now, this
representa un
space does
diálogo
not
para
just
avanzar
represent
nuestras
a
políticas y
dialogue to
prácticas
advance our
ambientales,
environmental
sino que
policies and
también refleja un
practices,
compromiso
but also
firme
reflects a
de
firm
nuestro gobierno, el
commitment
gobierno de
of
México,
the
y lo
government of
más
Mexico,
importante de
and
nuestras
most
comunidades
importantly from
locales.
our local communities as well.
Para el gobierno de México, liderado por el
For the
presidente Andrés
government of
Manuel López
Mexico,
Obrador,
led by Andrés
la
López Obrador,
transparencia y el acceso a la
the
información
transparency and access to
son
information
cimientos sobre los cuales
are
construimos una
foundations where we
gestión
actually
pública
build
responsable y
a
accesible.
responsible public
En
management
el
and
contexto
open
de los inventarios
management within the
forestales
context
nacionales,
of the national
estos
forest
principios
inventories.
adquieren una
These
dimensión aún más
principles acquire
significativa.
a more significant
Estamos hablando de la gestión de
dimension.
los
We're talking
recursos
about
más
the management
preciados
of our
y
most
vitales,
precious
nuestros
resources
bosques.
and vital resources, which
Como
are
ustedes
our,
saben,
our forests
los
indeed.
bosques son un
As you
pilar
know, the
fundamental
forests
para el
are
desarrollo
fundamental pillar for
sostenible
the
de nuestros
sustainable
países.
development of our
Son
countries.
sumideros de carbono,
These are carbon,
protegen la
these
biodiversidad,
are, they
regulan
protect
el ciclo
biodiversity,
hidrológico
they
y proporcionan
revolve the
mantos de
water
servicios
resource and provide
ecosistémicos
ecosystemic
esenciales,
services, which are essential.
siendo clave en
It's
la
key
mitigación y
in the
adaptación al
mitigation and
cambio
adaptation
climático.
of climate change.
Para hacer frente a estos
To
desafíos
face these challenges
y tomar decisiones
and to actually
informadas
make informed
sobre la
decision
gestión
making
sostenible de
on the
nuestros
sustainable
recursos
management
forestales,
of our forest
es fundamental
resources
contar
is
con
critical to actually
información
have
precisa y
precise,
actualizada
accurate, and updated
sobre el estado
information
de nuestros
on the
bosques.
conditions of our forests.
Los inventarios
The
forestales nacionales
national forest inventories
permiten obtener
allow to
información
actually obtain
detallada sobre
information,
la composición,
detailed information
estructura y
on the
dinámica de los
composition,
bosques,
structure, and
lo
dynamic
cual es
information on
esencial para la
forests,
toma de
which is
decisiones
essential for
informadas
the informed
en
decision
materia de
making on
conservación,
matters of
manejo y
conservation,
aprovechamiento
management,
forestal.
and forest benefit.
Si bien los inventarios forestales
Even though the
nacionales
national
son
forest
una herramienta
inventories are
indispensable
a
para generar
indispensable
esta
tool to actually
información,
generate this
su
information,
implementación
its
tradicional
implemented
ha
traditional
sido
implementation
compleja y
has
costosa.
been complex and quite costly.
En este contexto,
Within this
el Gobierno de
context,
México, a través
the
de la
government of
Comisión
Mexico,
Nacional
through the
Forestal,
National Commission,
ha
Forest
emprendido una
Commission,
ambiciosa
has
iniciativa
gone
para
in this
transformar
very ambitious
la
initiative
manera
to
en que
transform
llevamos a cabo
the
nuestros
way that we actually
inventarios
realize
forestales
our national forest
y hemos
inventories.
adoptado un
We've actually
enfoque innovador
adopted an innovative
que pone en el
focus,
centro de las
which actually
comunidades
puts the
locales
local
a los
communities,
dueños de los
the
bosques,
owners of the forest, at the
reconociendo su
middle
profundo
of this,
conocimiento
recognizing their deep
de los
knowledge
bosques y su
of the
papel
forest
crucial
and its critical
en su
role
conservación.
in its conservation.
Este método que hemos denominado
This method,
como
which we
monitoreo
known
forestal comunitario,
as community
involucra
forest
brigadas,
monitoring,
ejidos y
actually
comunidades
includes
contratadas
brigades
por
and
el
local communities
CONAFOR
hired by
que
CONAFOR.
utilizando una
They're actually
aplicación móvil
using
y
a
plataforma
mobile
de
app
inventories
and the Open
de la
Forest
FAO
app from
capturan y
FAO.
transmiten
He
datos
captures and
forestales de
transmits
manera
forest
eficiente
information in an
y
efficient way
segura.
and
La
safe way.
participación local y el
The
uso de
local
herramientas
participation and the use of
innovadoras
and
no solo
innovative
mejoran la
tools
calidad y
not just
cobertura de
improve
los
the
datos,
quality and coverage of
sino que
data,
también
but
aumentan la
also
eficiencia,
increases the efficiency,
reducen los costos, fortalecen las
reduces the
capacidades
cost,
locales
strengthens
y
local
elevan la
capacities,
legitimidad y
and
sostenibilidad de las
and actually provide
decisiones
the sustainability
de
and
gestión
legitimacy
forestal
of the
basadas
decisions
en
on this forest
información
management
confiable y
based on
objetiva.
reliable and
Más
quick
aún, con este
information.
proyecto
Even more so with
buscamos
this
lograr
project, which
múltiples
you seek
objetivos
to
entre los que
have
destacan
multiple
los
objectives,
siguientes:
in
el
which we have the
fortalecimiento de
following:
la
the
gobernanza
strengthening
forestal,
of the forest
el
governance,
incremento de la
the
eficiencia y la calidad
increase
de
of the
los datos,
efficiency and quality of
la
data,
generación de beneficios
the
económicos
generation
para
of
las
economic
comunidades
benefits
y
for the
la
communities,
incorporación del
and the
conocimiento tradicional
incorporation
de los
of
propios
traditional
comunidades
knowledge
locales.
of the local communities.
Estamos convencidos de que este
We are
enfoque
fully convinced
representa
that
un
this
avance
focus
significativo en la
represents
gestión forestal
a significant
que se
step
continuará
in forest
impulsando con
management, which will
entidades desde la
continue to
presidenta
actually
electa de
will
México,
continue with the
la
new
doctora Claudia Sheinbaum
elect
Pardo, que
president
además tiene una
of Mexico,
cualidad,
that she has
ella
a
misma es
that
ambientalista.
she's an environmentalist as well.
Asimismo, estoy seguro de que la
Also, I'm
futura
quite
secretaria
sure
del
that the
Medio
future
Ambiente y
Secretary of the
Sustentabilidad, la
Environment
doctora
and
Alicia
Natural
Bárcena
Resources,
Ubaldo,
Dr. Alisa
continuará impulsando
Aguilar,
acciones
will
en
continue to
beneficio de
foster
nuestro
actions
patrimonio
in
natural
benefit of
y
our
de
natural
nuestras
patrimony
comunidades.
and of our communities as well.
Agradecemos a la FAO en
I want to
particular su
thank
oficina
FAO in
regional
particular, its regional
para
office
América Latina y el
for
Caribe
Latin
y a
America
su
and the Caribbean
representante en México
and
por su
its
invaluable
representative in
apoyo en
Mexico
este proyecto.
for its invaluable support in this project.
Además,
In addition,
expreso mi reconocimiento a
in
todas las
addition, I want
personas
to recognize
participantes en este
other
seminario,
participants in this
quienes con su
seminar
experiencia y
that
conocimiento
with their experience and with their
enriquecerán este
knowledge
espacio de
will
intercambio.
benefit this
Tenemos
space of
confianza de que los
exchange.
resultados de este
We trust
intercambio
that the results
fortalecerán
of this
las
exchange will
políticas y
strengthen
prácticas
the
nacionales
policies and
y
national
apoyarán
policies and
esfuerzos
practices
similares en
that
otras
will support
partes del
similar
mundo,
efforts in other parts of the world,
permitiéndonos avanzar hacia un futuro
conveying,
más
allowing us
sostenible
to
para
have a
nuestros
sustainable
bosques.
future for our
Muchas
forest.
gracias y
Thank you so
éxito en
much
esta reunión.
and success in this meeting.
Muchas gracias al licenciado
Thank you
Meneses
so
por sus
much,
palabras.
Licenciado Meneses,
Para
for your
continuar con la
open remarks.
instalación de
To
esta reunión
continue
virtual,
with
damos la
this
palabra al
virtual
señor
meeting, we
Silvio
pass the floor
Simonit,
to Silvia Simonit,
representante adjunto de programas de la
Adjunct
FAO en
Representative
México.
of the
Bienvenido.
FAO in Mexico. Welcome.
Buenos días,
Good
distinguidos
morning,
delegados, director
distinguished
general
delegates,
de la CONAFOR,
General Director of CONAFOR,
estimados colegas, señor
esteemed
rector.
colleagues.
Es un honor para mí estar aquí
It's
hoy
an
en
honor for me to
representación de
be
la oficina
here
de la FAO
in
en México
representing the
en esta
FAO office in
importante reunión
Mexico from
virtual de
this
intercambio de
very
experiencias.
important
La
meeting on
información sobre el estado de
exchange of
los bosques
experiences.
es de suma
The
importancia para los
conditions of
países
the forest is
y la
very
FAO
important for the
desde
countries, and FAO
1948 ha
since
sido encargada
1948
de compilar
has
y
been
transferir
responsible of
información
compiling the
global
information,
a
global
través de la
information,
evaluación forestal
through
mundial.
the forest
Como
global
parte de
forest
estas
assessment
evaluaciones y
as
de
part
brindar
of these
apoyo para
evaluations and
reducir
providing
la
support
deforestación y
to
degradación de los
reduce
bosques.
the
La
degradation
FAO ha
of forest.
asistido a los
FAO
países
has
para mejorar la
assisted the
información
countries to
forestal
improve
a
the
través de
forest
los
information
inventarios forestales
through the
nacionales.
National Forest Inventories.
En la región de Latinoamérica y
In Latin America
Caribe,
and the
esta región enfrenta
Caribbean,
desafíos y
this region
oportunidades
actually faces
únicos en la
opportunities and
gestión de sus
challenges
bosques y
in the management of
ecosistemas.
its forests
Y
and
la red de inventarios
ecosystems,
forestales
and also
nacionales
at the
es la
National
región
Forest
que
Inventories.
contribuye
And
a
this
la
region actually
gestión y
contributes towards
conservación de los
the
recursos
conservation
forestales,
of the natural
proporcionando datos
resources,
precisos
providing
sobre el
accurate
estado de los
data
bosques.
on the conditions of the
Estos
forest.
inventarios permiten monitorear
These inventories
cambios y
allow us to
apoyar
monitor
estrategias de control de cambio
changes, support
climático
strategies
y
against climate
fomentar la
change,
cooperación
and to
regional e
foster the
internacional.
regional cooperation and international
Además,
cooperation.
facilitan la
In addition,
investigación,
facilitates
promueven la
the
participación
research through
comunitaria y
the community
contribuyen a la
participation
educación
and
ambiental,
contributes towards the environmental
asegurando
education
un enfoque
by
integrado y
insurance and
orientado a los
integral
desafíos
focus
y
and adapted to
oportunidades que
the
enfrenta la región.
opportunities and challenges faced by the region.
De igual forma, las comunidades y
Equally,
organizaciones locales son
the local communities
esenciales
and
para el
organizations are
inventario forestal
essential for the
nacional
national
debido a
forest
su
inventories
profundo
due
conocimiento
to
del
its deep
entorno y
knowledge
su
of the
áreas remotas,
surroundings in remote
capacidad para
areas and
proporcionar
capacities to
información
provide
actualizada y
updated and accurate information. And in this context, this event is a platform to actually analyze the importance of this participation of communities and local organizations in the collection of data for this national forest inventories. And I hope that we can actually identify and use the opportunities of these challenges and lessons learned so that together we could actually advance in the protection of our natural resources for the present and future generations. So thank you so much for your participation and let's have a great successful virtual
Muchas
workshop.
gracias por sus palabras de
Thank you so
apertura,
much
señor
for
Simón.
your opening
Y
remarks,
para
Mr.
continuar
Simon.
con esta
And to
interesante
continue with
conversación, quiero
this
dar
interesting
la
conversation,
bienvenida a
I
Carla
want to
Ramírez,
welcome Carla
asesora de
Ramirez,
la FAO para América
advisor
Latina y
from
el
FAO
Caribe
for Latin
en
America and the
monitoreo,
Caribbean
reporte y
in monitoring,
verificación
reporting, and
en Red Más y
verification
AFOLU.
in
Carla
RITMAS
nos
and AFRUL.
presentará hoy la
Carla will
importancia de la
present the
participación
importance
de
of the
las comunidades
participation
u organizaciones
of the
locales en
local
la
organizations and
recolecta de
communities
datos para el
in the
inventario
collection of data
forestal
for
nacional.
the National
Bienvenida,
Forest
Carla.
Inventory. Carla, welcome.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning, everyone.
Muchas
Good morning,
gracias
everyone. Thank you so much.
al señor director de la
The
CONAFOR
director from CONAFOR and
oficial de programas y
the officer of programs
representante de la FAO en
and the
México.
representative of FAO in Mexico.
Para todos, mi nombre es Carla
For
Ramírez.
everyone, my name is
Yo
Carla
tengo a bien
Ramirez.
apoyar
I
la Secretaría Técnica
support the technical secretariat
de la Red de Inventarios Forestales de
of the
América Latina y el
National
Caribe.
Forest Inventories for Latin
En esta
America and the
oportunidad
Caribbean. And at
tendré
this moment,
la
I will have
dicha de poder compartir con ustedes sobre
the
la
fortune of
importancia de
actually
la
sharing with
participación
you
local en la
about the importance
recolección
of the
de
local
datos en los
participation
inventarios forestales.
in the collection of data in
Para
national
todos
forest
aquellos
inventories.
que no están
For everyone that
habituados
are
con
for
los
everyone that
inventarios
is not
forestales nacionales, la
is
red de
they don't know about the
inventarios
national forest inventories.
con
This
base en la
inventory network,
definición de FAO
based on the
ha
definition from
ampliado la
FAO, has
definición de
expanded
inventarios
this
forestales para
the
esta
definition
región
of inventories for
como un
this
conjunto
region
de procesos para la
as a
medición,
cluster
recolección y
of a
análisis de
process to kind
datos
of collect
coordinados
and
por
analyze data
protección, siempre
together
dirigidos
with
por
detections
gobiernos para
led
producir
by governments to
estadísticas sobre el
produce
estado de
statistics
conservación y
on
tenencia de los
the
recursos
trends
forestales
and
de los
conditions
mismos
of
países.
the forest inventories of a country.
La importancia de los
Now,
datos de
the
campo
importance of
que
field data
son
is because
recopilaciones
these are
según una base
compilations
científica sobre
of on a
registros y
scientific
árboles porque
base
se basan
on
en un
trees
diseño
and forests because they're
estadístico
actually based
robusto
on a robust
y
statistical
también se
design. And
utilizan para
also, they're actually
elaboración de
used
mapas
to
y
elaborate
validar su
maps
calidad,
and to
así
validate its
como para
quality,
producir
as well
una
as to
serie de
produce a
estadísticas
series of
fundamentales para
fundamental
conocer el estado de
statistics
los bosques
to
de los
know the
países,
conditions of the
lo que
forests of the
permite la
countries,
evaluación y
which
ajuste
allows
de
the evaluation
políticas
and adjustment
y
of
acciones
policies and
relacionadas
actions
con los
related to
bosques y los árboles.
forests and trees.
Existen puntos claves
Now, there are
para la
key points for
implementación de
the
los inventarios
implementation
forestales
of the national forest
en el
inventories
campo.
in the field.
Perdón, es que acá el Zoom
Hold on.
me está tapando un poquito. Estoy moviendo. Discúlpeme.
Give me 1 second, please.
Estos puntos claves
So
se
these
refieren
key
a
points
la
I should refer to the
institucionalización para el
institutionalization
planteamiento continuo de la
for the
gestión
ongoing
administrativa.
finance and
Esto
administrative
es
management of
fundamental
this.
para
So this
poder
is key to
promover
actually
que
promote
los inventarios
that
forestales
the
levanten
national forest
información
inventories can actually
año
gather
con año y
information
ciclo con ciclo.
every single year and cycle
Normalmente
by
los
cycle.
inventarios forestales
Normally, the
tienen un
national forest
ciclo de
inventories
5
have
años
a
y
cycle of 5
los
years,
países hacen todo
and
su
the
esfuerzo
countries
para tener
do all the efforts
estos
to actually
levantamientos de
provide
información continua en el campo.
this ongoing
También es muy
field
importante
data
tener una
collection. It's also
estructura
very important to have a
interinstitucional funcional que
interinstitutional
permita
structure,
esa
a functional one
implementación
that allows this
exitosa.
successful
Es el
implementation.
trabajo de
Now,
muchísimas
it's the
personas el
work
que
of
se
many
necesita
different
para
people
lograr
that's required to
levantar la
actually
información
achieve
en
to
todos
collect
los
all this
territorios
information
a lo largo
in
del
all the
país,
territories
de los
throughout the
países.
country or the countries.
También es muy importante tener una buena
It's also very
selección y
important to have a good
capacitación de ese
selection and
personal,
training
esas
of
brigadas de campo
that
que
field
se
brigade staff
esfuerzan
that
en
actually does
llegar
all
hasta
the
los
effort
sitios
into
y
actually
poder hacer
reaching all
las
these sites
mediciones
and
lo
to
mejor
actually carry out
posible.
the measurements in the best possible
Para
way.
eso es bien
Now, for
importante
this,
tener
it's
una
important to
excelente
have an excellent
planificación en cada
planning
visita al
for
campo
each field
y
visit,
por supuesto en
and of
toda la
course,
cadena de
in
procesos que
all the
permiten el control
other chain to have a quality control to actually perform that successful measurement. And these points that are in green on the right, the work that's necessary to be carried out in the field. First, it's required to actually analyze the SAMP unit's location. We need an access and safety plan for all the brigades and the staff that actually carries out this work. Also, we need to actually socialize this information to actually go into the field and to actually notify the civil population that we're doing this work. And it also, in order to have to be successful in applying for the permits, a lot of strategies to request these permits in the territories according to conditions of each of the countries. So this permit application or request starts with the socializations, and they have actions previous to the field visits um, that are known as the advanced brigades, and also in the when they enter when the measurement brigades actually go in, there's some protocols that must be followed. And finally, they should have the field measurements through a whole process of training of these brigades, which is part of the quality control. There are also brigades that actually arrive later as part of those control processes.
Eh, Ahora todavía, a pesar de que
Now,
la-
even though
los inventarios forestales en
the
esta
forest
región
inventories in
van
this
muy
region
avanzados,
have advanced quite a
24
bit,
países de la región están
24 countries
desarrollando
and
sus
regions are actually
inventarios
developing
forestales. Hay
their forest
países
inventories.
que llevan
There
más de
are
100
countries
inventarios forestales.
that have more
Costa
than one
Rica es el tercer
cycle.
ciclo,
Mexico
Guatemala
has
tiene el
the
segundo
third cycle.
ciclo, Honduras
Guatemala
tiene
is
su
a
cuarto
second cycle.
ciclo.
Honduras is for the been doing their
Y
fourth
así
cycle
cada
now,
país
and each
tiene
country
una gran experiencia en
has
toda esta
tremendous
implementación, pero aún
experience
se
in the
enfrentan
implementation, but
desafíos.
they still
Y son
face certain
desafíos
challenges, and these are
o barreras
challenges
que
or
no se pueden
obstacles rather
controlar
that cannot be
por
controlled
los responsables de los
by
inventarios
the
forestales.
responsible of
Y
those
muchas
forest
veces es
inventories.
esto
And many
que
times
siempre hay que
there's
mantener esa
always we always
voluntad
have to
política
maintain that
institucional
political will and
y sobre
institutional
todo
will,
en el cambio de gobierno.
especially in the
La
changes
información
of government.
normalmente
The
es importante, pero
information
muchas
normally is
veces no es
important, but
prioritaria
many times
y
it's
es
not a
algo que
priority. And this
constantemente
is something that
los
constantly
responsables
that
en inventarios
that the
forestales en
responsible in
gobiernos
national
del estado,
forest
los que
inventories
generan
or the
información,
monitoring of those that generate information
necesitan
actually
movilizar
require or need to actually
continuamente
mobilize
dentro de sus
constantly
propios gobiernos para
within their governments
mantener
to
sobre
actually
todo un presupuesto,
maintain, especially
las
a budget,
limitaciones
particularly
financieras
on the
también
financial limitations are
digamos, una de las
are
características que
actually one of the
normalmente
characteristics
se
that
discuten
normally
en la red,
are actually
cómo
discussed
mantenemos el
in the network.
financiamiento
How
de
to
los
actually
inventarios
maintain the
forestales.
funding of the
Y
national
para ello,
forest
pues es
inventories.
importante
And for this,
desarrollar
it's very
una
important to actually
suficiente
develop
institucionalización.
institutional
Algunos
processes.
inventarios forestales no
Some
tienen
national forest
no son
inventories they
parte de
simply
una
don't have,
legislación,
or they are not
otros
part
sí
of a
lo son.
legislation.
Y,
Others
pero
are.
ese proceso
However,
se
that
está apoyando
process
mucho
are actually
digamos, a los países que sí lo tienen.
supporting the countries that do have them.
Pero siempre sigue siendo un
But
desafío tener un
it's
presupuesto
always a
correcto.
challenge to have
Luego
a
los
continuous
procedimientos
budget.
administrativos
Now, the administrative
muchas veces
processes
también se
many times
desconoce
are
cada etapa que
actually
requiere un
each
inventario
stage that
forestal
requires a national
y
forest inventories are actually
lo complejo
unknown,
que es llegar a los
and
territorios.
the
Entonces, los
complex to actually
procedimientos
reach these
administrativos
territories.
muchas
So the
veces
administrative
no
processes
están
many
diseñados
times
para
are not
resolver
designed to actually
algunas de las
resolve
acciones de los
a
inventarios
few of the
forestales.
actions of the national inventories.
También hay
Also,
muchas veces accesos denegados por
many times there are
desconfianza
actually
de los
access are
propietarios
actually
de los
rejected because
territorios de
of
los terrenos que se
the
visitan.
ignorance of the owners of
Y
this
esto,
farms that she
a
visited.
pesar de que se haga
And even
muchas
though
veces bien el proceso de
many times
socialización
there's a
y
socialization
estas
process,
visitas de
and
avanzada,
these field
muchas veces
visits
no se
many
logra
times are not be are
obtener esos
actually
permisos
are
hacer
does not
esto.
they do not obtain the permits to
La
actually
última
enter
barrera
those
pues
farms.
siempre sigue
And
siendo
their
la
very last
inseguridad para las
obstacle
brigadas.
is the
Digamos,
insecurity for the
los
brigades.
20 años que yo tengo de estar trabajando en este
In the
tema,
years that I've been working on this
la
topic,
inseguridad
the
ha
insecurity
aumentado.
has increased. So this is a fact, and there's always very important to actually maintain all the protocols, and that's why it's important to actually integrate the into the process the local professionals. It's very important, and this conversation, this exchange of experiences is so important because of this reason. And as you can see over here, um, we have some opportunities to actually reduce these obstacles for this a successful implementation. In principle, the inclusion of the local communities and organizations in the process of the field visits actually comply with social safeguardings in the local participation that she discussed at the international level, on the forums and conversations on biodiversity and climate change, among others. Also, there's a great opportunity of improving and expanding that transfer of knowledge or that exchange of knowledge between the communities with the government. This is due to the field brigades many times depend on the local expertise to actually to know the site and to recognize the site and that location that it has, because they learned this since they were small and children. The local people many times they don't they they don't have that or the professional that was trained in the city doesn't have that knowledge. And also there's a great opportunity of actually strengthening and to train the local professionals or the local technical people, and also the local practice taxonomists in the new technologies and methodologies to actually develop the forest measurements. Another opportunity is the generation of local employment. The forest inventories currently many times actually hire local um, people, but we would require sometimes there are actually obstacles, and but they're not fully trained. Many times it's just like the local guide. So now we would expect that if we can actually foster or promote to expand this work with the accompaniment of the local communities, that should be a continuous process, and also for the employment of for the generation of employment rather. And in the process of implementation, with the participation of the local organizations, these denied permits are actually reduced. Also, some transportation costs are also reduced, because this is one of the largest items in forest inventories. If we actually work with local offices, all these costs on mobilization, without a doubt, will be reduced. And lastly but not least, the reduction of insecurity. Now, in order to actually achieve that local participation, we also have potential obstacles, such as the administrative process to actually pay the local people or organizations. Not all countries have actually gone through this, or they haven't analyzed this. So it is they should start analyze how to actually to achieve these local payments. This really depends on the funding sources. Like I mentioned, some funding sources can actually come from the public arena, but also from international support. Also, we might have some limited technical capacities, especially if there's not enough technical professional staff within the communities. Then uh, we will require to actually increase the training processes and to make these a bit more intensive. And in general, this can actually include or or to actually provoke as a greater cost um, because of these training, the expanded training, um, and also in quality control. Another obstacle is the language, but this it can also be an obstacle, is also an opportunity because we can actually work by improving and standardizing all the different measurement protocols, and we could also work on translating some reference materials. There are countries that they already have material translated to share this with their local communities, and this is an excellent practice. So to continue doing this, it would be ideal to actually expand this local participation, local engagement, and with this. This open for discussion. This if information, and we'll have the opportunity of actually knowing my colleague David Sabogal of what FAO is doing on this issue, and also the experiences of three countries of the region. Now, if you want more information on the national forest inventories in Latin America and the Caribbean, through the network, we have this publication from 21 countries that actually compiled their experiences, which we will give you the information, provide the information so you can actually access this publication. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carla, for this quite interesting presentation that actually that opens the space for discussion. Now, I would kindly invite David, to present the generalities of the Giga Forest program. And I welcome David. David, you have the floor. David, you have maximum 15 minutes because now we have to be because we're quite limited on time. So okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Con todas, un gusto.
It's a pleasure to actually be here with all you. My name is David Sabogal. I'm actually responsible for the forest area for the indigenous people,
El programa InfoForest,
and it's a component of AIM Forest, which is actually centering the monitoring, innovative monitoring of forest. So I'll do a quick summary of what this project is all about and how we're supporting the work of training and closing those gaps of knowledge and of local capacities
protagonistas en todo lo que es el monitoreo forestal.
in everything has to do with forest monitoring, and also um, uh, the AIM Forward program is actually focusing on governments on forest monitoring with the use of technologies, and actually and also closing those technical and training gaps on forest monitoring. It also has a component on fostering the space for local indigenous people that I'm going to talk about today. Now, within this component, it's to strengthen the technical capacities for the monitoring and mapping of the forest and to foster the participation and access for sources of climate financing, and also to generate evidence on the contributions of the territories and practices and knowledge by the indigenous communities and climate age agendas and conservations. We're actually working globally in several offices and regional offices at the country level and different teams within FAO in this work. It's important to work with indigenous people and communities and also members from civil society under a platform that is called Landmark, which is a geospatial platform which actually seeks to actually add information on territories of indigenous and local communities worldwide. We actually work with several organizations in different regions and also with several other partners and experts on this topic on forest monitoring and also mapping
Eh, Nuestras áreas de trabajo son muy
Now,
enfocadas en
our
lo que
areas
es
of work are actually
adecuar
focused on actually
las herramientas que
adapting
existen para poder
existing
identificar un
tools
usuario
for forest
local.
inventories for the
Entonces, parte de
local
eso
engagement. So
implica
part
hacer un
of this
diagnóstico realmente de
implies
cuáles
actually
son las
have a diagnosis
necesidades
of what are the
de
needs
aprendizaje, necesidades
of
de
learning
prioridades
needs of
de
and
aprender
priorities
y qué
of
tipo de
actually
recursos
learning
técnicos
and what type of technical skills are
necesarios
actually
a nivel local
required
con estas diferentes
locally
asociaciones
with
y sus
these
comunidades base.
organizations
Y
and their base
eso
communities.
implica también
And
adecuar
this
varias
also
de estas
implies that
herramientas
she
que
adapt
nosotros vamos
other
a
tools that
desarrollar, por
FAO
ejemplo,
has also
todo
developed
lo que son las herramientas de Open
in
Forest
regards to the open
que se
forest
mencionó.
tools that were
También
mentioned.
estamos
We're
buscando
also
hacer que sean
seeking
más accesibles para usuarios
for these
locales,
to be
¿no?
more
Tanto
accessible for the
en
local
lenguaje,
communities
tanto de proceso de
in
investigación,
language and
encuestas
training
y que sea más
and
amigable para
so it could be
usuarios
a bit more user
a nivel
friendly
local.
at the local
Y
level.
eso, claro, enfocado en todo lo que
And
es el
this is
monitoreo
actually focused
forestal,
on forest
identificación de
monitoring,
inventarios forestales,
such as
pero
in
también
case of
para
national
otros
forest
sistemas.
inventories,
Otra
and also
parte
for other
importante es el Sistema
systems,
Nacional
other components
Forestal,
from
en parte de
the forest
RD, lo
systems,
que son
the
salvaguardas,
RV systems, the
el
safeguards,
mismo monitoreo para la gestión
and the
forestal y
monitoring for the
conservación
forest
local,
management
¿no?
and
En
local
bosques
conservation,
comunitarios.
forest and
También
community
utilizar
forest,
herramientas
and
como
also
mapeado territorial,
tools for territorial
prácticas
mapping,
digamos,
practices,
capacitación en todo lo que es
and
restauración
training on
ecosistémica en el
and
tema
ecosystemic
biocéntrico
restoration
y
and
también
biocentrics.
enfocado
It
también
also focused on the
capacitar en lo que es
on
diferentes fuentes de
training
financiamientos y
different
y cómo
sources of
acceder a esto.
funding and how to
Entonces,
access this as well.
es una gran área de
So
trabajo que
this
estamos
is
desarrollando en la
the
FAO,
area of work that we're doing
justo para
over at
apoyar este
FAO
proceso de
to
capacitación, de
support
crecimiento de
this trading
capacidades de las
process and
instituciones
capacity
a
and
nivel de instituciones
capacities
indígenas y
and for
locales.
community and local
Buscamos
indigenous
hacer esto a través de
organizations. We seek
comunidades
to
de
do this
práctica, ¿no?
through
Que buscan también
through
atender varias
communities of
necesidades e
practice that she
intereses de
attends
las
different
comunidades
needs
de
and
resaltar que
interests.
estamos recién
It's important to actually highlight
definiendo los
that we're
enfoques de
actually
estas
defining the
estas
focus
prácticas que van a
of
ser a
these
nivel
practice
regional,
communities that will be at the regional
correspondientes con un enfoque
and on
protagonismo de
focus on
organizaciones
protagonists
indígenas que
from
lleven a
the
cabo
indigenous
estas
community
comunidades de
that
práctica
actually
para
carry out
intercambiar
these practice
lecciones,
communities to
aprendizajes,
actually gather
prácticas
lessons and
con
best
diferentes
practices
enfoques y
with
objetivos,
different
entre ellos
focuses and
también
objectives.
lo que es
Within
áreas
these, we
forestales,
have
lo que es
forest
Sistema Nacional, pero
inventories,
también otras áreas de
but also
paz,
other areas of
cooperación,
importance,
ciencia de tierra,
like
recursos climáticos,
land
áreas como
ownership,
bosques naturales,
forest management and
conservación.
conservations, and some other related
Tenemos
to
también un
this.
área muy
We
importante
also
que
have a very
busca
important area that
generar
actually
evidencia,
seeks
¿no?
to actually generate
Del papel,
evidence
contribuciones y
and the
también la
role and
aportación, ¿no?
contributions
En
of
cómo
what God
estas
actually
comunidades
mentions
pueden aportar a
and
sistemas
how these
nacionales,
communities can actually
de qué
support the
manera
national systems
contribuyen esos
and
datos y
how can
otros,
they actually
digamos, beneficios
contribute
genera
with or
eso.
the data and benefits
Estamos trabajando a
generated
nivel
by
de
this.
estudios de
We're actually
casos
working
detallados o
at
demostraciones con los
detailed case studies
investigadores
with
ya
traditional knowledge and
regionales y de manera
also regional
global
studies
de
and at the regional
contribuciones
and global
de
level
comunidades
with
y sus bienes y
contributions from
prácticas hacia
communities
la
and their
agenda
practices
climática
and
y claro,
lands
también todo el tema de buenas
according to the
prácticas y aprendizajes
climate
de este proceso
agenda
de capacitación
and
sobre
best
monitoreo
practices and learnings
con
on monitoring
experiencias
and
justamente de este país que van
participative
a ser
mapping,
parte de
and
este
their
tipo
engagement
de
will be
actividad.
part of these
Y
activities.
también buscamos cómo
And we
integrar la
also seek how
información
to integrate
que se genera a nivel
information that's
local
actually
a
generated at the
base de estos
local
modelos
level towards these
políticas globales como
global
el
policy
CBD
frameworks
y diferentes
like the
metas que tenemos
CBD
relacionadas
and
a
different
el desarrollo,
targets
dependencia
related to
de territorios,
land
pueblos
use and ownership
de pueblos
and
indígenas y
territories
comunitarios
of the
por
local
ejemplo, también áreas
indigenous
bajo
people,
restauración
as well
y todo
as
eso
areas
con
under
fuentes de
restoration,
información
and
a nivel
this with
local
the information
bajo
sources
esta
locally
plataforma Landmark,
under
que
this
también hay fuentes
landmark
de información
platform.
importante que
We
pueden
have very
ayudar y
important
ayudarme a
information that can
integrar
actually help to
el
actually
alcance de estos
monitor
temas.
the scope of
Y
these
bueno, lo dejo así
of these
y cualquier
goals.
cosa
And if you
interés
have any
relacionado a este
interest
proyecto y lo que
of knowing
estamos
more about
haciendo,
this
qué gusto
project and what we're
poderme
doing,
conectarme. Muchas gracias.
just please go ahead and contact me. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias, David, por ese
Thank you so
excelente
much,
manejo
David,
del
for that
tiempo.
excellent
Muchas
time
gracias.
management. Thank you
Ahora,
so much. Now
pues vamos a dar paso propiamente a nuestro
we'll
panel
pass the floor to
Participación Local en la
our
recolecta
local
de datos
panel
para
in
inventarios
data
forestales
collection for
nacionales.
national
Y
forest
para ello
inventories.
yo quiero
And for this, I
presentarles
actually
a
want to
nuestros
introduce all of
invitados
you
desde México,
our
Guatemala y
guests
Panamá.
from
Ese
Guatemala,
será el
Mexico,
orden
and
en que
Panama.
vamos
That
a
will be the
presentar
order that we
las
present the the lessons learned from the three participating countries. So from Mexico, we have Armando Alanis, a manager of the National Forest Monitoring System and president of the National Forest Inventories for Latin America and the Caribbean. For Guatemala, we have Dulce Mejia, coordinator of the National Forest Inventory from the National Institute of Forest, and Eliseo Galvis, national coordinator of the Accelerating Towards the Innovation of, of Forest Monitoring, FAO in Guatemala. Now for Panama, we have Victor Corro, coordinator of the National Forest Inventory and Carbon from the Ministry of the Environment. Welcome, everyone. Now, I remind everyone that we only have 15 minutes for each country's intervention, which each country is only has 2 minutes left for your assigned time. I will open my camera and I'm going to tell you that you only have 2 more minutes and to wrap up the presentation. So, welcome Armando Aranis from Mexico. Please go ahead.
Muchas gracias, Naidu. Buenos días a
Thank you
todas y
so
a
much,
todos,
Naidu.
colegas.
Welcome everyone, all of your colleagues.
Permítanme hacer
Please
la
allow me to actually
presentación
present.
ahora. Voy a compartir
Right
mi
now, I want to share
pantalla.
my screen.
Por favor, avísenme cuando puedan
Please let me
verla
know
ya.
if you can see my screen.
¿La pueden ver ahora?
Ya la
Do you
estamos
see my
viendo.
screen? Yes, we
Perfecto.
can see your
Muchísimas
screen.
gracias.
Thank you so
Bueno, pues
much.
nuevamente
Thank you
darles
so
las
much.
gracias a todas las
Thank
colegas
you
y
so
colegas
much,
de
all the different
de la
colleagues
región por reunirse en este importante
and for
evento para
meeting
hablar
in this very
de inventarios
important
forestales
inventory
nacionales de América
event for
Latina
the
y el
National
Caribe.
Forest Inventory for Latin
Es de
America and the
importancia
Caribbean.
discutir
It's critical to
las
actually
acciones
discuss
necesarias
the
para
necessary
impulsar
actions
la
to actually
mejora en los
promote
inventarios forestales
the
nacionales
improvement of the
y
National Forest
enfrentar de manera
Inventories
común los
and to
retos
actually
que
face the
los inventos
challenges
presentan
that
en la
we
implementación. Y
actually
en este
have in the
sentido, bueno,
implementation. In
este
this regard,
seminario tiene la
this
idea
seminar actually has the idea
podamos exponer
that
nuestras
we can actually
experiencias para lo
present
cual
our experiences
quisiera poner a su
in
consideración
which we
este
actually want to
diplomado
put to your
científico
consideration
en materia de
what we've been doing
monitoreos
in Mexico
forestal comunitario
in
en
community
apoyo a la
forest
implementación
inventories,
del inventario nacional forestal y
supporting
de
the
suelo.
National Forest Inventory and of land use.
Solamente para darles una idea del reto al que
Just to
México
give
se
you an idea
enfrenta,
of the challenge of
tuvimos
what
en nuestro
Mexico is
país
facing,
más del
our
70%
country,
de
more
su
than
territorio, esto es
70%
cerca
of
de
its territory,
59 millones
there's
de hectáreas,
130
corresponde a
million
terrenos
hectares,
con vegetación
correspond
forestal
to
constituidos por bosques, selvas,
as
zonas
forest,
montañas,
jungle,
manglares.
and
Esta vegetación,
wetlands,
perdón, y esta
and
vegetación es
this
considerada
vegetation
como
is considered
forestal
as
nacional,
forest,
debe ser
and
monitoreada
therefore
a
it
través
must
del
be
inventario
monitored
forestal
through
nacional.
the National Forest
Para hacer
Inventory.
esto, el
Now, to
inventario
actually
tiene
do this, the
establecidas más de
inventory
26,000
has
parcelas
established
de
more than
muestreo en
27,000
conglomerados de
parcels
muestreo en todo
or
el país
conglomerates
que
throughout the
se
country
establecen bajo un
that
diseño
as
sistemático
establishes under a
estratificado que nos
systematic and
permite recolectar
stratified
esta
system
información.
that allows us to
Como
collect
pueden
this
ver, este es
information.
un reto muy
As you can see,
importante en la
this is a
colecta de
very
información.
important
Si bien tenemos que
collect
colectar esta
information. Even
información
though we need to
en
collect
un
this
periodo de
information
5 años,
in the period of
estamos
5
hablando
years,
de
we're
poco
actually
más de
talking
5,000
about more
parcelas
than
o
5,000
conglomerados de muestreo
parcels
que
or
debemos
conglomerates
visitar
of
cada año.
sampling that we need to
Los
visit
retos a
every
los que
single
nos
year.
hemos
And the
enfrentado
challenges that
últimamente
we've actually
es
faced
que
lately
tenemos un número
is that
reducido de
we have
empresas
a
especializadas a
reduced
nivel nacional
number of
para
companies
participar en
specialized
procesos de
in the country
licitación
to actually
pública
participate
como lo
in the
marca la
public
ley.
bids,
También
such as law
hemos
requires.
observado un
And we
incremento en
actually
los costos
observed
para
an
realizar el
increase in the
muestreo
cost to actually
y
carry
hemos
out the
implementado
sampling.
también la reducción
We actually
presupuestal.
faced of
También,
budgetary
como lo ha
reduction.
mencionado Carla
And
en su
as Carla
presentación,
mentioned in her
hemos tenido un
presentation,
creciente número
we
de
had
sitios de
an
muestreo por
increasing
razones
number of
sensibles
sampling
o
points
por
which are
condiciones sociales,
inaccessible due
económicas o
to social
seguridad,
conditions or because of
porque nos ha
insecurity,
impedido levantar
and really
información.
hasn't
Y
allowed us to
también
actually
por
collect
el
information.
diseño del
And also
esquema
because of the design
de licitación pública en el
of the
pasado,
public
se tenía
bid
un
scheme,
proceso
we
demorado en
had
lo que se
a
refiere a la
delay
supervisión de las
process
brigadas,
in the
la revisión
supervision of the
incluso la colecta
brigades
de los datos
and
de
also
campo. Y también nos
the
enfrentábamos a que la
field data
mayor parte de
collection.
los ejidos y
And
comunidades
the
de
majority of
forestales
the community
son dueños y
lands and communities
propietarios,
are
perdón,
actually
forestales,
owners
pues
of the
tenían poco
forest lands, and
conocimiento de la
they had very
información
little
del
knowledge
Inventario
about the
Nacional Forestal y de
information of the
Suelos, lo cual
National
era
Forest
muy
Inventories,
importante para
which
nosotros
is very
para
important for
evaluarlo.
us
En
to
este
actually increase
sentido,
this knowledge. In this
bajo la
sense,
dirección del
under
licenciado
the
Luis Meneses
direction
Murillo
of Luis
y de
Meneses
las
Murillo,
indicaciones
and according to the
del
indications
Gobierno de la República,
of the government of the Republic,
enfocadas a promover el
focused
bienestar
on promoting
en las
the
comunidades
well-being of the
forestales en nuestro
communities,
país,
the
pues
forest
se
communities in the
decidió
countries. we decided to actually start the implementation of a scheme of forest monitoring for the community to actually increase this national forest and land inventories. And it has very specific objectives that I'll summarize very briefly related to the empowerment of community lands and communities to actually monitor their forest resources, to develop their technical capacities to collect field data, to increase this recognition of the information of the national forest inventories between the owners and forest land owners, and to provide practical data collection tools adapted to the local context that can actually be used autonomously. And finally, but not least, this part is very important, which is aligned to national priorities, is to actually channel investments in community lands and communities to actually collect field data with the idea that this can actually generate new opportunities of employment and income in the forest communities of our country. A lot of people that we actually talked to when we actually started with the implementation of this scheme, they actually mentioned that it was very important to actually maintain the quality of data. And aware of this, we actually in Mexico we actually established a process, a rigorous process to actually implement the inventory that has to do precisely on focusing on the quality of this data. And for this, we should establish, we should identify certain key elements relevant to actually implement the inventory under this community monitoring, maintaining the quality of data. The first of these is a selection of the agrarian hubs that have the experience and technical capacities on forest resources, and select the staff to integrate these field brigades. The third is that once we selected these field personnel, to actually train them and homologate the criteria for data collection that can actually ensure um, the procedures and criterias for the collection of the field data. Another very important part is to actually hire support specialists from CONAFOR so they can actually support us with everything that has to do with the supervision, technical supervision, in the ongoing supervision, and everything has to do with the control and quality assurance. And finally, but not least, to establish these protocols for the control and quality assurance that allowed us to actually, in real time, to actually carry out some necessary connection to actually ensure that the data were actually being measured adequately and then the records were done actually adequately. Very important part of this selection that I would like to present to you has to do with identifying these local communities and communities with experiences and technical capacities. For this, we should focus on the information that we had available from CONAFOR through its national information subsystem based on the typology of producers and beneficiaries from CONAFOR, the list of local communities and communities with authorization for its benefit, and also those that have a certification of force or chain of custody to actually select the local lands and communities. Now, we should focus on those local community lands and communities that experience, technical experience, and administrative experience and financial experience in the production of raw materials or the transformation of these raw materials for increased value added products. And these local communities and communities have local knowledge, they have an experience in the management of resources and the monitoring of these products. Between the desirable characteristics, we actually wanted them to have certifications in forest management or uh, their own professional services, forest engineers, that many of them are from the local communities that should support in all activities referred to the forest management and forest benefit. And in 7 states of the Republic, we actually managed to identify more than 70 communities and local lands with these characteristics, which of 30 of these complied with the requirements, not just the technical requirements, but not just legal, administrative, and financial requirements to actually be hired. And finally, the which hired 13 agrarian hubs. So it's very important what God actually mentioned in our presentation is that we need to actually have in consideration the different procedures, legal administrative procedures to hire service providers, because many times the local legislations establish certain requirements that are actually very difficult to actually comply by the local communities and local lands. From our part, we had a whole process of accompaniment, not just the technical person, but the legal and administrative requirements, so that these grading hubs can actually be hired accordingly. Now, one of the very important characteristics to actually implement the scheme is to develop a mobile capturing system. In the past, all the National Forest inventory data was collected and registered on paper, which actually increased the times to actually collect the information or to center all this information and then analyze information. And also, we had logistical problems that sometimes we had to move a very important number of paper to have these records stored, and then also to actually receive this information. And using the work done by FAO in development of the tools on the open forest platform, going forward, actually developed a mobile app based on Open Forest Collect, which allows to actually collect field data. And if the conditions of connectivity actually allow, it can be done. It can actually centralize this information in real time. Now, this platform, it allows to actually support the quality assurance criteria, because we can actually program rules for data collection that validates the data. If you have a numeric data or text data or certain characteristics, we can actually validate, like uh, like the validation of restrictions, for example, not accept to have a normal diameter when when a tree is alive, and that this diameter simply does not exceed a determined range according to experience that we have, or a specific height that does not concur with the diameter that's being recorded. It also allows us to do validations to actually omit important data so that they won't be lost. So we have benefits with a greater efficiency, a better accuracy, the reducing cost, and uh, and maintaining the quality of the data that's being collected. Now, what do we have right now? I actually want to comment that we're actually working in 7 different states, particularly in a few of these are the most important in terms of the forest territories. We have 31 field brigades from these 31 local lands that actually have more than 2,222 contracted conglomerates, and we advanced 71.7 percent advance. We have a 42 point, more or less about 2.2 million dollars, or equivalent to 42.6 million Mexican pesos, according to the current exchange rate. Now, I want to mention that this actually allowed us to local communities and local lands can have the resources to hire their own brigades, and that these brigades to participate people from the local community. We've seen that in addition to have people from the community participate in activities like the field assistance, the brigade leads with their technical experience, and we've seen this as how you saw the video, the participation of women in activities that normally they women haven't participated in. We also verified that a few local lands and communities have actually used this investment to destine resources for connectivity through satellites. It allows them not just to send information to us for field data collection, but to maintain an open remote communication between other community land. And there's also another important thing that I actually want to highlight, and that we've actually done this every single time that we actually present the advance in the National Forest inventory that has to do with the of what the community actually think about. So you can see a testimony that we actually collected during this work, in which they actually manifest that the field data collection in the framework of the National Forest inventory
ha
under
llevado
this
también a
under
incrementar
the
la
scheme, as he
pertenencia
increased a sense of
algunas brigadas y
a
algunos
sense of
regimientos
ownership
con su medio
of
natural,
a few local
reconociendo
lands
cuáles son los factores
and
de
brigades of
desequilibrio,
what are
cuáles son las
the factors of
características más
disturbance
adecuadas
and
para
what
la
are the most
gestión de sus recursos
adequate
naturales
points for the
y sobre
conservation
todo
of
también un
natural
diálogo
resources.
incluso
It allows
intergeneracional
to
con otros
allow
pueblos y
an
comunidades de la
intergenerational
región
dialogue
para
and with
fortalecer
other
la
local lands and
gobernanza,
communities to actually
la gobernanza
increase
local.
the
Es
local
decir,
governance.
estamos
In
atendiendo
other
con
words, we're
nosotros
actually addressing
situaciones
some
muy
other
relevantes que tienen
situations
que ver más
which are
allá del
quite
carácter
relevant that goes
técnico,
beyond the
que
technical
favorecen
part.
la
It
gobernanza y
actually
que es un
favors the
factor bien, bien
governance, which is a
importante
very
en la
important
gestión de los
factor
recursos
in the
forestales.
management of
En este
forest
sentido, bueno, solamente comentar
for
la
resources.
implementación del
I also
Inventario
want to
Nacional
mention that the
Forestal, que son los
implementation of the
bases
National
para
Forest
hacer
Inventories
como un
and land
inventario, ha
inventories
sido muy
under this
exitoso desde
community
nuestro punto de
scheme has
vista
been quite
y
successful
esto
from
nos
my point of
ayuda a
view,
cumplir con los
and this actually
compromisos
helps us to actually
establecidos por el
comply with
gobierno
the
para apoyar a las comunidades
commitments by the
forestales en el
governments to
desarrollo
support
y
the
promover
communities in their
la gestión de
development,
los recursos
and that
forestales en base para su
local
desarrollo social y
resources can
económico. Y
actually be
con
done
esto
for the local and
termino
community
invitándoles nada más a
and
que
financial
en la medida de lo
resources.
posible
And
consulten
also,
las
please
plataformas que
visit the
tenemos
different
del Inventario
platforms that
Nacional
we should
Forestal,
have
que
from
son el
national
Sistema Nacional de
forest and
Monitoreo
land
Forestal,
inventories.
haciendo un
And
paréntesis y un
and
comercial,
actually,
comentar que
I also want to
recientemente la
announce that
Comisión
very
Nacional
recently,
Forestal,
the National
junto con
Forest
la FAO,
Commission, together with the
promovieron la
FAO,
integración
actually
y
promoted
publicación
the
del Inventario
integration
Nacional Forestal y de
of the
Suelos
national
en el
forest and land
catálogo de
inventories
microdatos para
in the
la
catalog for
agricultura,
microdata for
lo cual también se
agriculture,
cumple con un
which
compromiso de
also
transparencia
complies
establecido
with a
por
process of transparency
nuestro
established
presidente y
by
por
our
la
president
administración
and
de la
by
Comisión Nacional Forestal a
the
cargo del licenciado
officers
Luis
by
Meneses
the National
Murillo. Con
Commission
eso termino,
led by Luis
quedándome
Meneses
atento
Murillo.
a recibir
And
sus respuestas y
and this is it.
comentarios
If you
y
have any
agradecerles
comments or further comments,
nuevamente
I
la
want to thank
oportunidad que
once
nos da
again the
para presentar
opportunity to
esta
present
iniciativa en nuestro
this
país. Muchas
initiative in our
gracias.
country. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias, Armando, y
Thank you
sobre
so
todo
much,
por el muy
Armando.
buen manejo del tiempo. Le doy paso a la experiencia de Guatemala.
And we'll see
Invito a
Guatemala.
Dulce Mejía y a Eliseo.
And I'll invite
Por
Dulce
favor, de igual
Mejia and
manera,
Eliseo.
tienen 15 minutos para su
Yeah, 15 minutes
intervención. Una
for your
vez
intervention.
terminen, falten 2 minutos para
And
terminar su intervención. Yo prenderé mi cámara,
when
encenderé
you
la
only have
cámara
2 minutes,
para
I'll open my camera
solicitarles que vayan
to request
redondeando
you if you can
el
actually
fin de
wrap
su
up
intervención.
with your
Gracias.
intervention. Okay, thank you so much.
No sé, Eliseo, si estás hablando, creo que
Eliseo,
tienes
I think
apagado el micrófono.
your
¿Podrías, por
microphone is
favor,
on mute.
encender
Can
el
you
micrófono
open up your mic,
y
please?
poner la presentación
And if you could
en
actually share
modo
your
presentación?
presentation,
Gracias.
thank you.
Buenos días, ¿ya nos
Good
escuchan?
morning. I think everyone can hear me now. Yes.
Fuerte y claro, gracias.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas
Yes.
gracias.
Thank you so much.
Inicialmente va a participar
We'll
para
have
introducir el tema
to
la ingeniera
introduce this
Dulce
topic, we
Mejía,
have Dr.
compartiendo la
Mejia
experiencia
to actually
muy
share
reciente y que
the
todavía
very
estamos
recent
en
experience
discusión
and that
del
we're
tema
still
del segundo
discussing this
ciclo del
topic
inventario
from the
forestal de
second
Guatemala.
cycle
A
of the
manera de
Forest Inventory
introducción,
Guatemala.
les dejo con
So
la
I'll pass
colega Dulce
the
Mejía.
floor to my very dear
¿Qué tal?
colleague,
Muy buenos
Dulce
días.
Mejia. Good morning, everyone.
Gracias por el
Thank
espacio
you
a
so
la
much
FAO,
for the
¿verdad?
space
Y
from
y a la
FAO and
red, ¿verdad?
for the opportunity
Por
and for the
hacer estos
network
espacios
to
abiertos
actually have these open spaces
para dar a conocer, ¿verdad?
to
Qué es lo que se está
actually
haciendo
let
a
everyone
nivel
know about what we're
latinoamericano
doing
y
In Latin
específicamente pues
America,
aquí en Guatemala,
specifically here
¿verdad?
in
Con
Guatemala,
respecto al tema del
in
inventario
regards
forestal
to
nacional
the
en su
National
segundo
Forest
ciclo, ¿verdad? De
Inventory and its second
mediciones.
cycle,
Pues
cycle measurements, of
actualmente,
course.
¿verdad? Ya
Now,
estamos en la etapa
currently, we're actually in the
presentar los
stage
resultados
of
del informe
presenting
final
the
de este
results in the final
levantamiento que se
report
hizo en los años
from the data collection
2020
that we
al
did in
2023,
2020
¿verdad?
to 2023.
Levantamiento de datos, pues que
This data collection that
se hizo, ¿verdad? De forma
was carried
conjunta
out
con otras instituciones del
together
país,
with some other
como CONAB, ¿verdad? Y junto también
institutions
con
of the country like
Marimala,
CONAB and with
para poder
Marimada
ejecutar
to
pues este gran
actually
proyecto, ¿verdad? Nosotros
actually carry out this
tenemos bastantes
project.
unidades de
Now we
muestreo
have many
nacional
different
y
sampling units
eran
at the national level,
715, ¿verdad?
and there's about
En inicio.
715
Pues
units at the very
finalmente por
beginning. And
por
finally,
condiciones,
because
digamos, ajenas a la
of conditions of the goodwill from each of the institutions. Well, we weren't able to actually complete the data collection from all those 715, which he analyzed with 494 units actually. Now, as you can see this in the map on the slide, all the different red points are the units that were not collected and that were focused on the northern part of the country in Petén. We have these are beautiful archaeological Mayan sites. So these units are very remote and difficult access because of the terrain. And as the lessons learned from the second cycle of the inventory, it was we found out that we had to do some more exhaustive work in regards to communication with local communities. Now here in Guatemala, we actually have four different etnias of originary people. So we want to link them with them, actually include them in the next cycle for data collection. And we also have the difficulty of the language barrier, like Carla actually mentioned, and the fact that we have many different languages, indigenous languages. We have 25 different indigenous languages, so this presents a hardship for the next cycle.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you so much, Dulce,
o la introducción, mejor
and
dicho, a
also for
este
the
tema de las
introduction to this
que
topic on the
instituciones
proposal
en
that we're
Guatemala
actually discussing
y también
here,
con instituciones del sector
and also
forestal.
with
La
institutions from the
participación de las
forest
comunidades locales en el
committee,
inventario
the local
forestal es
community in
básicamente
the
la gran sombría del
local
forestal comunitario
and,
del
uh,
monitoreo
and also
nacional
from the national
en
monitoring
función del
in
fortalecimiento
function
del
of
sistema nacional de
strengthening
monitoreo
the
forestal.
national
Y eso es lo que les
forest
vamos a
inventories.
presentar, lo que estamos
And that's exactly
discutiendo
what we're going to
tanto
present. We're
ahorita
actually
con nivel
discussing
de gobierno como
with the local communities with Conapinap.
parte de lo primero que fuimos desarrollando fue el diagnóstico,
And we
pues la
actually
primera
developed,
parte conceptual que no le vamos
and the
a
conceptual
presentar en
part
esta
that's,
presentación por las razones del
I'm not
tiempo,
going to, I'm not going to
la
present
parte
this right now,
diagnóstica muy brevemente les comentamos que
but
nos dimos a la tarea de
we
identificar
actually had the
dónde
task of actually
específicamente
identifying
están las
exactly where
comunidades y
these community
tenemos la
lands
fecha
were
de punta de
located, and we have
Guatemala a nivel
a
nacional
map at the national
en
level
toda la República de Guatemala
throughout
se
the
ha
Republic of
hecho
Guatemala.
este
We actually
diagnóstico para
did this
identificar
diagnosis to
dónde
actually
están las tierras
quantify exactly
comunales
where we
en
have this
extensión
community
estamos
lands
hablando, como vemos,
and
en
what
1500
extensions do we have,
kilómetros. Es parte
like you see in this slide.
del
So this is actually
diagnóstico
part of the
de esta
diagnostics
propuesta, aparte
of
de
this
la revisión
proposal
bibliográfica, pero
and
ya
also the bibliographical
directamente al recibir
review.
la
But
propuesta
seeing
también nos dimos
the
a la tarea de
proposal, we
diagnóstico de
actually had the
identificar
task of actually
cuál es la gobernanza que
identifying
tiene el
what's
monitoreo
the
forestal en las
governance we have
comunidades.
in the
O sea,
forest
las
management from the
comunidades
communities. So the
tienen
communities
cierta
have
organización y un
certain
tejido social
organizations and a
bastante
social
fuerte en
network which
unas
is quite
regiones más que en
strong
otras, pero hay
in
un
a
tejido
few
social de
regions more
base
than others. But
muy
there's
unificado que nos puede
a
facilitar
very strong
llegar a las
social network
comunidades en
on how
esta
to actually reach these communities
tema de la incidencia
in
y de la
regards to
participación en
the
aspectos
influence and
territoriales. Y
engagement
de esta
in
cuenta,
forest
pues hemos
matters.
identificado que hay una
So
alianza
we've
nacional de
identified that
organizaciones
there's
forestales
a
en
strong
Guatemala,
alliance
que es la
in forest
famosa
in Guatemala,
OSG, como se
which is the
nombra
OMNESEG,
ellos directamente, y cuentan
and
con organizaciones
and they
forestales
actually
en
have
niveles de primer
forest
nivel, como son
organizations,
todas
first
las
level forest
organizaciones
organizations,
forestales en el
like
norte,
the forest
cooperativas en las Verapaces,
lands in the north
parcialidades en el
and
occidente y otras
partialities in
organizaciones
the
en el
west,
resto del
and some
territorio
other
nacional.
organizations in the national
Se han
territory.
organizado en
From these,
organizaciones
we've actually organized
de segundo
in
nivel,
second
muchas de ellas
tier
ya
organizations.
conocidas como
Many of
ACOPOP,
these,
que es muy
they're like
conocida
ACOPFOP,
internacionalmente, que está
which
bajo
is
la dirección de
internationally
la
well
Alianza de
known,
Organizaciones Forestales de
one
Segundo
of the
Nivel, que integra
which is
nuestra
one of
alianza. La
10
idea es que a través de
second
esta
tier
alianza podemos
organizations of the
sedimentar
world,
la
and we can
información hasta
also
las
base the
organizaciones forestales
information all
comunitarias
the way
con
up
esta
to the
propuesta
community
de
forest organizations
participación
of engagement
comunitaria en el monitoreo
in the
forestal.
community
Básicamente,
in
¿cuál es
forest monitoring. So
nuestro rol
what's
acá?
our
Es el hacer
what's
un
our role
puente
here is
en el
to actually
caso de FAO, que
bridge
tenemos
in the
una
case of
asociación
MFAO
dominante
that we
con
have
la
a voluntary
OSG
association
y
with the
contribuimos con la
ONSH,
asistencia técnica hacia
and we
FAO
actually have no solo
the
the
tema
technical
del inventario
support
forestal, sino
not
desde
just
las
in national
antes de la
inventories,
asesoría del Sistema
but
Nacional de
under the
Monitoreo
umbrella
Forestal,
of
que
the
es a donde queremos
national
llegar para
forest
llegar
monitoring system
finalmente
to
hacia
actually
las
reach
comunidades.
the
Y la
communities.
propuesta
And the
básicamente, por
proposal
resumirle ella,
basically
estamos, digamos, hablando
we can actually talk about the fact that this program has two big elements that I see integrate this at the right, the bluish bubbles. There's a local training and capacities that I see includes like in case of Mexico, they already mentioned. They mentioned the training and methodologies and tools, the ones that she used at the national level, and they also have their own tools, and the ones that we can actually provide, such as the open force tools, to actually use this at the community level. That form integration of these units at the contracts and the agreement level to articulate with the national forest monitoring system and with the climate change information system. So on the right, uh, this is the spaces of participation where the local communities can actually participate in the forest monitoring. We're talking about the intervention in the inventory with engagement of the local community, the direct coordination has to do with the chat that she mentioned in the previous slide, which is the ONSA, the National Alliance on Community um, Support to reach the territories and to actually collect the data from the community. So in this case, this slide actually complements the previous one in how the program on local capacity strengthening was developed in the design of this training and with the methodologies that we're talking about. What are the interaction of those communities through the celebration or through the contracts in a legal way, and the sustainability part to actually identify the figure for the financial recognition. And we're also talking about the participation of the local communities and indigenous people that has this figure of financial recognition. And there's a direction here in Guatemala that actually comes from the Ministry of Public Finance, which is the technical budget unit, which actually the budgetary allotment is actually provided for the public sector. So we need to identify and seek this economic figure, which we can actually identify to actually provide a financial recognition to the communities and also for those people, and how to actually provide this 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 transfer for the families and individual people through this system, which is the system of a budgetary classification for the public sector. In this case, we can actually create the activity to assign the budgets for the community engagement on forest monitoring, the budgetary classification in the public sector is actually classified in programs, sub-programs, and activities. We need to seek in each of the institutions what its direct structure to actually identify best figure and to provide sustainability in time to this financial recognition for the communities. And the communities can directly participate um, those are actually within or adjacent or next to the sampling units that we already have identified in the national forest inventories. The idea is to have all this structure that's being worked on in the national forest inventories to actually have this relationship of this program at the for it to be a multi-purpose program. When we talked about the National Council here in Guatemala, I mentioned that the proposal was submitted and it will be included not just to have a forest inventory, but also to actually include the monitoring of biodiversity, which is one of the very important elements that we have as the main objective from the National Council on Protected Areas. But this can be done so and to provide a multi-purpose programs where it could be replicated at the same time scalable at the national level. Now, of course, we need to actually use certain phases for this, and one of these phases is the one that we're actually discussing, the proposal and to preparing this discussion, this field of action by identifying in the diagnostics all this structure from the government institutions and also the institutional structure base structures. We always need to seek a pilot in the future to have the support from Core Forest at the global level, to have the support here in Guatemala, and in order to take this proposal to the community level to actually implement this with the communities that has that actually close to this, or they have actually close to these assembly units. Um, we talk about the national forest inventory. So these are our base proposals. So with this, we will wrap up my presentation. I try to be as short as possible due to time limitations, and I truly thank your attention and and um, if you have any questions, we can address these in the Q&A session. And thank you so much for your
Muchas
attention.
gracias a Dulce
Thank
y
you so
Liceo
much,
por
Dulce
como
and
lo han
Liceo.
acabado de mencionar, el
As
excelente
mentioned by
manejo del
them, the
tiempo.
excellent
Les
management of
recuerdo a los
time.
casi 80
I
participantes
recall the
conectados
80
en los
participants
diferentes
that are actually
canales de la
connected in a
FAO a
different
escribir sus
channels
preguntas
from
en el
FAO
chat.
to actually write
Nuestro
down
equipo estará
your
recogiéndolas
questions, and
luego
our team will
del
collect all this.
espacio en donde vamos a escuchar
We'll
la
collect your
intervención de
questions.
Panamá. Para ello,
And now we
invito
hear
a Víctor
Panama. I
Corro,
invite Victor
el
Corro,
coordinador del inventario forestal y carbón del
National
Ministerio de
Coordinator
Ambiente de Panamá,
from the
a
Ministry of the Environment of
darnos su
Panama.
experiencia.
If you
Muchas
can
gracias y
actually
bienvenido.
share your experience, and welcome once again.
Buenos días. ¿Usted pone la presentación?
Good morning. Can you
Sí, señor, ya
share
la
my
estamos
presentation?
empezando a
Yes,
compartir.
it's we're
Está
sharing
en
this right
este
now.
momento compartida.
It's actually shared right now.
Voy.
De igual manera, tiene 15 minutos a los 30
You'll
minutos.
also have
Prenderé
50
la
minutes.
cámara para
At the
pedirle que
13
por
minutes
favor
in, I'll
vayamos
open my
cerrando la
camera so you can
intervención.
actually
El
wrap up your
micrófono es suyo.
intervention. The floor is yours. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your kind invitation, so we can actually present the advances and the experiences that we've had in these 11 years of the national inventory and carbon inventories. Due to the other presentation, I see that we are very similar in our activities, especially the work that we've been carrying out. The other,
Aquí la experiencia,
and
soluciones y retos se
the
encuentran en el
experiences
inventario
and
forestal de
challenges in
Carbón.
the national
Enumerado 5
forest and carbon
puntos.
inventory.
Vamos
We've
a entrar
indicated
primero en
5
la parte
points
de la necesidad y
that
la
would talk
importancia del
about the
inventario
needs of the
forestal.
importance of the national inventories.
Como es sabido,
As
ustedes
everyone
a nivel
knows very
de cada
well,
país nuestro tenemos
at our country levels, we have certain
cuando empezamos el inventario
similarities when we
forestal,
actually started this
por las
inventory.
condiciones en que estamos económicamente en nuestros países.
Due
Panamá
to
carece
the
de
economic
información
conditions of our
actualizada sobre la
country. So,
provisión de especies
Panama needs to
y los
update
volúmenes
their information
existencia en los bosques
and
del país.
the existing
El anterior
volumes of
nacional
forest in the
forestal de
country.
carbono
The last national forest
forestal se
inventory
realizó
and
en los
carbon
años
inventory was
68 y
carried out back
72
in the
por medio de
years
la FAO
1968 and
y fue
72
enfocado en
with support
inventar
of
la existencia de
FAO.
las especies
It was
vulnerables
focused
que
on
tienen el
inventorying the
aprovechamiento del bosque.
existence of woodable species
En la etapa
to
inicial
actually
evaluamos
benefit
cómo
from
planificar
those
lo que nos
forests.
apoyaron.
So,
En Panamá, como parte
in,
de un
in
proceso de
Panama,
discusión y planificación
a
entre
part
el
of
medio
a point of
ambiente
discussion
y
between
la
the
FAO.
environment
El
and
organismo
FAO.
estrictamente de Panamá se
So
definieron
the
los objetivos
Ministry
y
of
alcances
Environment
del
actually
Inventario
defined
Nacional
the
Forestal
scope
y de Carbón.
and objectives of
Simplemente
this
manifestó el interés
forest
de
and carbon
incorporar
inventories.
como
And
parte
we
del
actually
forestal
were interested
nacional
in having
un
a national
programa
forest
de
inventories, not just to
mínimo
comply with the
para la red, para
minimum
RED
requirements for the
Plus,
network
sino también
or
proporcionar
for the Red
profesional
Plus, but
información
also
para
have
apoyar la
professionals'
definición y ejecución
information
de
to actually
políticas
define and
forestales
follow up
para
on
mejorar la
forest
gestión
policies and to
del
actually
país. Por
generate
tanto, se estableció que el
um,
inventario debería
generate this for the country.
conceptualizarse
So
desde el
that
inicio en un
inventory should
enfoque
conceptualize
multipropósito.
from a multi-purpose point of
Por
view.
favor. Aquí estamos
Next slide,
viendo
please.
en el anterior,
So
en la
here,
anterior. ¿Me la puede retroceder, por favor? Aquí estamos viendo el mapa, que al
so
momento de
this
esto
is
se
a
hizo
map.
con la dirección
We
del día
did this
fastidioso para
with
la parte administrativa de lo que es
the
el uso
administrative
sostenible de la flora.
office on
Realizamos
the
un mapa
geographical location of this, but we
con
actually have a map
8.000 puntos,
with
8.059 puntos potenciales de actividad
8,300
cuadrícula
and 27 sampling points. So where we were actually determine the forest sections only. And based on this, the scope and objectives of the inventories at the initial part from the UN Red Panama program, as part of the discussion and planning process, we should define the objectives and scope of the national forest inventories. The Ministry of Environment actually manifested an interest of having this forest inventory not just to comply with the minimum requirements of Red Plus, but also to provide information to support the definition and follow up on forest policies and to improve the forest management of the country. The objective of this pilot phase of the national inventory is to have information on the realities and differences of key parameters, biomass and carbon, and to actually to collect field information and know the time and cost of this, and to train technical people and the environment, the private enterprise and the indigenous people in the collection of field data. During this first phase where we actually did the inventory, we did have we wanted to actually form this group, and we actually introduced the indigenous community, and we had a team from the private from a private company. This was critical to design the national forest and carbon inventory, and so it could be as efficient as possible to generate acceptable information in order to reduce time and cost of field collection. Now we actually propose to actually increase the size of the parcels, because these parcels were two square hectares, and we had no information on how these parcels were going to be. And we actually we did a pilot program with information. Was very important to actually determine in the future what's the size of the parcels and how many sampling units we're going to actually enable to comply with the first part of the forest and carbon inventories. At the end of this capital, I, we actually modified to have these field data, and these modifications were actually set in initial parts to actually collect from the pilot phase as this inventory. Now, thanks to the pilot phase, we actually determined and to provide information to actually continue in the first part of the of this national forest and carbon inventory. We did some workshops with our staff. Our technical staff were scattered throughout the Republic and in each of our regional offices in Panama. So we actually facilitated knowledge in the areas and the communication with the sampling sites that we are going to actually be enabled to collect information. The evaluation of the results during the pilot phase was very important because this is to provide information from with different key parameters based on the volume of forest and carbon. And it was critical to actually know the different times and cost of the different and to actually train the staff from the indigenous people. And in this second part, these challenges were very important. It was very important because in with the indigenous groups that we have in Panama, we actually considered that the Noble Buble were one of the or one of the groups that we have. They have different professionals like agronomists and professionals in agriculture, and it was very important to actually know that where we actually introduce this to them in the field, and the cost of these sampling units was through different structures, and we actually taught them how to actually take the samples and how to actually collect data on the forms that were provided to them And
En la parte de
and
la
also
aparte le quería decir que estos eran grupos
and
juveniles.
these were mainly very young people that participated in this.
Gunayala
And
también
then
se
in
recogieron
the
información de
Gunayala
grupos jóvenes los cuales también
region, a
participaron en esta
lot of
actividad
other young
y
people he
debieron hacer un
participated in
acercamiento en
this,
esta área de ahí.
and they also collected
Igualmente, estos
information
grupos
equally
Vera Una,
in the
que están en la
groups
frontera con
in
Colombia,
Vera
también
Unan,
se les dio
which actually
talleres
borders
en
Colombia,
campo,
were
pero
actually
los
provided
proyectos
with
tecnológicos
workshops in
pudieron
the field,
participar en la
and they actually
colecta
managed to
y poder
participate in the data
tener una
collection and
alimentación
to have
monetaria fueron
and
los
to be
grupos
compensated
Nove Buglé. Porque
and
prácticamente
compensated
al momento de hacer esto, las transacciones con estos
when
grupos, hubieron unos
when we actually work with these groups,
problemas
there
también
were
financieros que
certain
tuvimos que dejar
financial problems that we had
dentro de esa actividad, pero
to
estos
stop
grupos
this
están
activity.
formados
But
porque
these groups already
supuestamente
formed because
tenemos que
supposedly
retomarlo
we
por
need
lo
to
que es
actually
las primeras mediciones que estamos
take the
realizando a
first
nivel nacional.
measurements that were carried out at the national level.
La próxima, por favor.
Next one, please.
Quiero también recalcar que
I also want to highlight the fact that
en la agrupación, antes de terminar,
that
nosotros
that we
después del inventario forestal
after the forest
la primera parte
inventories in the first part of the
primera parte
the
plan
first
piloto,
part of the
hicimos una segunda
pilot,
licitación de las
we
parcelas,
did a
donde
second part
las
when we
agrupamos
actually
por
studied
su
the
categoría de
parcels,
bosque maduro,
when we
secundario, bosque verde,
actually
bosque
categorized
vegetativo,
them
bosque de arrastre, plantación
in the
de coníferas y
different
plantaciones agropecuarias. Primera
categories
parte del
of this
informe.
forest.
En la segunda parte de
In the
este
second
inventario,
part of this
nosotros pudimos
inventory,
ubicar
we
con nuestros
actually
técnicos y equipo de
located
análisis
with our technical
presentes
people and analysts.
92 parcelas
We
que
actually studied
estaban
92
ya no estaban
parcels
en bosque y no bosque,
that
sino estaban
were
ya
not in
en
the
estratos, que eran los
forest,
estratos de bosque, de
but they was
rastro,
in
uso de los
the
vegetales, manglares
in
y
an
coníferas.
agricultural
Entonces,
use
segunda parte,
land
como le llamamos,
and wetlands,
pusimos 92
and we had about
parcelas.
92 parcels that were
Posteriormente,
actually studied
juntamente con el
after
grupo
this,
aquí de
together
Dr. Rodríguez y
with the
personas,
group from Dr.
a
Rodriguez
través
and
de
myself
las
through
estadísticas y unos trabajos que
the
realizamos,
statistics and
pudimos
some samples
determinar y reducir las
we
parcelas
did.
de 2 hectáreas
We
a 1 hectárea,
reduced the
donde
parcels from 2 hectares
tuvimos
to 1 hectare, when we actually
conglomerado
managed
de
to actually have
150
a
parcelas,
conglomerate
ya que
of 150
aumentamos las
parcels,
parcelas
which increased the parcels,
de
number of
las
parcels,
unidades de muestreo para tener una mayor
to
variabilidad
have a
de
greater
los datos que estamos
variability of
obteniendo.
the data that we're actually obtaining.
Esta,
So this,
este trabajo se hizo
so this work was actually done
con el
based
apoyo
on the
registro forestal de
on
los
the
Estados Unidos,
endorsements
USG,
from
donde
the
nos dio la
U.S.
beneplácito
Forest
de
Agency,
que nuestros
where they
datos tuvieran
actually
bastante
and
buena
and
calidad.
and
Un trabajo muy bueno
apparently
que lo
our
hizo fue
data
realizado
was
por nuestros
done
técnicos, el doctor
according
Rivera
to
y el
our
doctor
own
Rodríguez.
realities.
También les quiero decir de que
I also want to mention
este ha sido un trabajo arduo
this has been a very arduous task with together with the ministry. We actually create a series of documents related to the inventories and providing guidelines and forms for the field work. So we during the field collection we should use an area that actually receives quite a bit of rainfall, and we actually consider uses the tablets for our conditions in the tropical humid forest. It's there's a lot of lightning and it's quite humid. So and that's the main obstacles that we have in regards to land use. We have the calicata, which we're actually doing this 1 meter by 1 meter deep. The apparent density is over 50 centimeters to actually detect carbon. We should do this with the first 30 centimeters, but the rest information is actually based for a number that we're trying to do an approximate number. Um, and so that information is very important for our agricultural development in our country. Now here we have dexometers and GPS. We use a Munsell chart, and we also conserve. We actually conserve the plant samples that are taken to university to actually or to actually help us to so we have also the compass and we give this to our technical people, and now we're actually doing a restructuring because our technical people from 11 years ago, they had to vary, and we're trying to actually seek new engineers and new technical people to actually carry out this activity. And compared to other countries, they have the capacity of actually having a financial support to actually have this type of groups. In Panama, we actually worked with private enterprises where they said they would go to the field, but we didn't obtain the results that we expected, or data that we expected. They had a lot of errors. There's the first phase of the inventory. We actually hired a company, but we gave them two of our technical people to go to the field and to verify the quality of data that was actually taken on the field. Now, logically, the data quality that we're actually taking from the very beginning, we actually went to the field to see exactly all this, but that was very costly. And also, one of our priorities is the security of staff. We had a security protocol, and our equipment was very sophisticated, and they had snake bite equipment, and they would go to areas which is very humid and very similar to what other countries are actually doing. But as where she mentioned, there's a lot to say, but I think we are open to any results. If you have any questions, please let us know. As a matter of fact, we're actually using to actually modifying this to actually assess the data, and the metrics recommended by FAO, and we're still um, trying for the government to have a mandate that these activities are actually constant and to actually seek funds, and this actually helps us in the development of our own development in the national forest inventories of our country. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to share and to indicate, but that's it for me. Thank you so much. At your service.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Saludo
Victor
por
Gordo, for
estas
your
experiencias
intervention
maravillosas desde
and for these
Panamá.
wonderful experiences
Quisiera
from Panama.
resaltar antes
I
de
actually want
entrar
to
a
highlight before we
nuestra
go to
sesión de preguntas,
our
la
Q&A,
participación de las
the
mujeres
participation
y los
of
jóvenes
women and
en
of
las
youth
actividades
in
de
the
levantamiento de
activities
información de los
in data
inventarios
collection for
forestales,
the national
así
forest inventories,
como el
as
trabajo
well
de
as the
técnicos,
work
tecnólogos
of
y
technologists
profesionales
and
de las
professionals and
mismas
technical people
comunidades
from
locales,
the
muchos
local
de ellos
communities, many
propietarios
of
de
these
bosques,
actually the
en
owners
la
of these
colecta
forests
de la
in
información
the
para
collection
el
of this
inventario
information
forestal
for the national
de
forest
los
inventories
países.
of the different countries.
Quisiera ahora darle la palabra a Armando
I want to pass the
para
floor to
que pueda
Armando
responder la primera
so he can
pregunta
actually
que
respond to
tenemos
the first
en uno
question
de
that we
nuestros
have
canales.
from one of our
Armando, la
channels.
pregunta es,
Armando, the
¿crees
question is,
que el
do you
aplicativo
believe
Open
that
Forest
the
Collects
Open Forest
podría
Collect app
implementarse
can
en
be
bosques
implemented
amazónicos
in
con
Amazonic
accesos
forest
remotos,
with
condiciones
remote
de
access
temperatura y
and high
precipitaciones
temperatures
específicas?
and rainfall?
Gracias, Naidu, y gracias por la pregunta.
Thank you so much.
Sí,
Thanks so
el
much for your
aplicativo
question.
Open Forest
Yes, the
Collect y
Open
su nueva
Forest app
versión
and
Arena
Collect and its
Forest
new
Arena
version,
están
Open
diseñados para
Forest Arena,
realizar
are actually
encuestas que
designed
pueden
to carry
utilizarse
out
fuera de
polls that can
línea,
actually be
es decir,
used
no necesitan estar
offline. So
conectados
they don't
en
need to
todo
be
momento para
collected
hacer la
at all
colecta de
moments to
información.
actually collect
El
information.
aplicativo y la
So
encuesta que
the
se diseñan
application
se almacena en el
is
dispositivo
actually
móvil que llevan a
stored in a
campo
mobile
y toda
device
la
that's taken
información
to the
que se
field, and all
colecta
the information that's
se
collected
almacena
is
ahí.
actually stored
Una
right
vez que
there.
están
Now,
cercanos
once
a
they
una
are
zona
actually
donde hay
close
servicio de
to an
internet o
area
pueden
where they
hacer la
have internet
visita,
service and the or
entonces
they
ya
have to go
pueden
back to
hacer
the
la
office,
captación de los
then they
datos
can actually
a
upload the
nivel central
information
donde se haga la
to
colecta de
the
datos
central
sin ningún
data
problema.
collection
Entonces es
without
muy,
any
muy
issues. So
fácil
it's
utilizarlo
yeah, it's very
en
easy to actually
áreas
use this
remotas, como les
in
digo,
remote
donde no
areas
requiere tener
because it does
conexión
not require to
continua,
have
porque toda la
a
información se
continuous internet
almacena
connection
en el
because all the
dispositivo.
information is
En el
actually
caso de
stored on the
utilizarlo en
device.
ambientes
When
extremos,
actually
vamos a
use this
decir
in
así,
extreme
que sean
conditions, for
muy húmedos o
example,
muy
if it's very
calientes,
humid or very hot,
lo que
or
se
with extreme weather
recomienda
conditions,
es
what we actually
conseguir
recommend is
dispositivos de
to
uso
actually
rudo
get
que sean incluso
robust devices
resistentes al agua o a los
and
golpes
maybe
para que
waterproof or
puedan
water resistance
trabajar sin ningún problema.
So
Nosotros,
these can
en
actually
el
work
caso de
without any
México, hemos
issues.
trabajado incluso con
In the case of
teléfonos
Mexico, we actually
inteligentes
work with
que ya han
smartphones,
funcionado
um,
adecuadamente, pero
and they actually work
ciertamente si
quite
tenemos
well.
un
But certainly,
dispositivo
if
con
we have a device
características de uso adulto o
with
con suficiente
robust use
memoria
or with
o
sufficient
dedicadas
memory
especialmente a la
or
colecta de
dedicated
datos,
specifically
su
for data
eficiencia
collection, its
entonces la
efficiency is a
respuesta
lot
corta
greater.
es sí se
So
pueden
the
utilizar,
answer in short,
están
yes, these
diseñados para
can be
que se pueda
used.
hacer
These are
y
designed to
existe
actually
todo el respaldo y
use these, and we
verificación
have the
in-house
support
para
from
hacer
FAO
las
to
encuestas
actually
y hacer
do
mantenimiento de los datos
this and to
correctamente.
actually manage all this data and also to
Muchas
analyze this
gracias,
data.
Armando. Tengo
Look,
una
thank you so much,
pregunta
Armando.
para
I do have a
Dulce y
question
Eliseo.
for Dulce
¿Cuáles son
and
los
Eliseo.
siguientes
What are
pasos para el
the
desarrollo
following
de la
steps
estrategia en el caso
to
de
develop
Guatemala?
the strategy in the case of Guatemala?
Muy buenas tardes para todos y todas
Good
nuevamente.
afternoon, everyone. Good
Días.
afternoon. I think good
Sí,
morning,
como
actually.
decía,
So,
el programa
as
el propuesto o la
the
propuesta
program
es
is
empezar el día
actually
de hoy con
the
una
proposal
fase
of
de
this program
preparación.
is to have a
Estamos
preparation
actualmente
phase
la
in
fase
which we are right
piloto, la
now,
fase piloto
the
que
pilot phase,
esperamos tener ya
which
el
we
próximo
expect
año
to
acciones
have this
directamente
done
en
next year
desarrollo de
with
programas de
direct actions
capacitación, por ejemplo,
in
y
training programs.
dependiendo de
And
ello, así
also,
como
depending
ahora
on
el
this,
Consejo Nacional de Áreas Protegidas
the National
están
Protected Area
en la
Council
discusión y en el
is
desarrollo de
actually
diferentes
discussing in the
propuestas.
Ministry of Environment. They're
De ellos,
discussing on this
lo que queremos
proposal,
es trasladar esta
and what
propuesta
we
de
actually want
piloto
is
sea
to
propia
actually
del
transfer
gobierno.
this
Entonces
proposal
dependemos
so that the
mucho
government can take ownership of this. So
la
we
dinámica
depend on
primero
the
a través
dynamics
de las
and
altas
of course of the
autoridades de
interest
las
of the high
instituciones que
authorities
mencionaba,
and
luego de la
institutions that I actually
parte
mentioned,
interna
and also
institucional,
from the
y nosotros
internal
vamos a hacer ese
institutional dynamics,
acompañamiento. Pero
and then we will provide this
esta es la parte
accompaniment.
del programa
But
de
at this
mentores.
moment,
La
the
misión que tiene es
InfoForest,
a dar
its goal is to
acompañamiento a
actually
toda esta fase
accompany
preparatoria
all
y de
this
fase
preparational
pilotal
phase and
en los
pilot phase
próximos 2 o 3
in the
años
following
que
2 or 3
dura el programa
years
InfoForest.
that
Y
the
vamos a
Angel
estar con
Program
esta
actually
asistencia técnica
takes,
tanto
and we have
a
provided
CONAP
technical
como
assistance from
al
CONAP
Ministerio de
and
Ambiente y
also
Recursos
to the
Naturales, que
Ministry
también se está
of Environment
sumando
and Natural
desde
Resources
Bosques
that
como actores en esta propuesta.
that they
Así
have interest
que
in this proposal.
estaríamos hablando
So yes, we're
sobre
talking
trabajar
about
concretamente en la
a
visión
temporary period
de
to
de aquí
respond
a 4 años.
of about
Gracias
4
por
years.
la pregunta.
Thank you so much
Gracias
for
a
your
ustedes
question.
por la respuesta.
Thank you so much,
Tengo
all
una
of you, for
pregunta
your
para
answer. I
Víctor
have
y
a question
Armando.
for Victor and
Víctor, me
Armando.
gustaría que respondas primero.
Victor,
¿Podrías, por
you might
favor,
want to
indicar
answer
qué
first. Can you actually
barreras de
indicate what obstacles
implementación
of
de la
implementation
recolecta de campo se
from the
superaron
field
luego
data
de esta
collection
experiencia que
were
nos acaba de
overcome from the
comentar?
experience that you actually
Bueno,
mentioned?
actualmente
Now,
nosotros
currently, we
estamos trabajando en base
we are
al
working
lo que hicimos al
on
principio con
what you did at the very beginning with
los formularios tienen una
we
reciclación.
have our water resistant
Tratamos de
forms.
cuando hay esas lluvias
We
comparar y seguir,
we
pero hasta
have
el momento
constant
estamos
rainfall.
tratando ahora
We use
mismo
these water resistant
de
forms,
introducir unas
but right
tablas
now
de
we're trying to actually
implementar los
use
formularios. Por eso
a
le
tablet.
hizo la pregunta que hizo, le hicieron a los míos Alanis. Ojalá que
So
ese,
hopefully
ese documento que tienen ustedes,
hopefully
que es
this document that you actually
el
have,
modelo
which
ese que
is
hicimos
the
para trabajar con ellos, nos podían mandar para
this model, you can
verlo y
actually
saber si
send
es
this model
factible.
to see if it's feasible to actually use this.
Ok.
Pero por lo demás estamos trabajando bien, en Silvamétrico lo
Yes, we're
estamos trabajando muy
working.
bien.
It's working very well. We're actually introducing data right there. It's simply that sometimes we don't
con el Silvamétrico, nos las quitan y estamos en
we
eso.
we're actually
Tienes
using
una
this quite
persona permanente
successfully,
que esté
and we have
con el
someone constantly using this platform.
Muchas gracias.
Okay,
Le
thank
haríamos
you.
la misma pregunta a Armando. ¿Qué
The same
barreras de
question for
implementación de la
Armando.
recolecta de
What
campo se
obstacles in
superaron luego de
implementation
esta
were
experiencia?
overcome after this experience?
Gracias por la
Thank
pregunta.
you.
Una de
Thank you
las
so much for your
barreras más
question. I think that one of the most
importantes
important
para romper
obstacles
esta barrera
is to actually
ideológica
break that
donde
is ideological barrier
piensan que
in which
las
many people actually
personas de
think
comunidades locales no
that the
son
local community
aptas
people are
técnicamente hablando
not
para realizar
technically
la colecta de
skilled
datos de
to
inventarios
actually
a nivel
collect
ejemplar
data
que hemos
and
realizado
field inventories. The
nosotros en
exercise
México nos
that we carried out in
permitió
Mexico actually
darles
allows us to actually
capacitación con una
show that it
capacitación y
is
seguimiento
possible to do this
adecuado,
with proper
proveyéndoles de las
training and
herramientas
follow-up,
para la colecta de
going from
datos.
the
Entonces,
tools
creo que
for
esta es
data
la primera
collection.
gran barrera
I think
que
this is the first
existe y
great
que habría que
obstacle barrier we
romper.
have, and we have to
Nosotros
break.
las comunidades locales, las
So the
personas
local
que forman
communities
comunidades
and
locales
people from the local communities
perfectamente
are
capaces de
actually
hacer trabajar de
adequately
campo,
skilled to collect
pero sin
field
duda
data,
requiere de tener un
but they do
acompañamiento
require to
técnico
have a
adecuado, ¿no?
technical accompaniment.
Quizá podrán tener
Maybe they could actually
curvas de
have
aprendizaje un poco más
a,
pronunciadas, pero al
a
final
longer
lo
learning
importante es
curve.
que
But at
aprendan
the
los
end of the day,
conceptos
once they
del
actually
uso
learn
de
about the
las
methods
equipos,
and the
herramientas,
use of
su
equipment and
desempeño
tool,
se vuelve tan
their
bueno como el
performance
de
is
la
as
brigada
good
de técnicas
as
especializadas
the someone from the specialized
para
technical
hacer la colecta.
brigade
La otra
for
barrera
the collection
que
of data.
existe muy
Now, the
importante
other
en términos
barrier that we
generales
actually
con los
have in
inventarios
general
es que
terms
no
from
es
the inventories and that it's not as
no es
and
visto a
maybe
veces muchas
it's
veces
not
en
seen
estos temas
as
de participación de comunidades locales,
in these
es
topics of
ver
community
los temas
engagement is to
administrativos
see
y
the
legales que a
administrative and
veces
legal
nuestras
requirements.
leyes o
Many
nuestros
times our
requisitos legales
laws or legal
establecidos en estas
requirements
leyes
established by these
constituyen
laws
algunas barreras importantes
constitute some important barriers
para poder avanzar en la
to
contratación
actually
pública,
advance
particularmente en el caso
in
de
the
México,
contracting with
hablamos,
people.
por ejemplo,
In
de los
Mexico, for
requisitos
example, we talked
establecidos
about the established
para
requirements
poder suscribir un contrato
actually subscribe or
por
sign a
ejemplo,
contract.
cumplir requisitos
For example,
fiscales, ¿no?
they need to
De honorabilidad. Por otro
um,
lado, también
contemplate
cumplir
or
con requisitos relacionados
tax
con
requirements or
tener una
also need to
cuenta
consider
bancaria, por
have
ejemplo,
a bank account, for
algún otro
example, a formal
apellido,
bank account
tener
of that community land,
una
or to have
documentación adecuada de la
a adequate
representación de los
documentation
órganos
of the representation
directivos de los ejidos y comunidades. Todo
of
esto
the
nos
community
enseñó
lands,
que
community lands and
además
community
de la parte
board.
técnica tenemos que
And
poner
this
mucha
technical part,
atención
we
en
need
la
to actually
parte
pay attention to
administrativa y
this
legal
in the
y también
administrative
ser
and legal
capaces de
part,
brindar este
and to also be
acompañamiento.
capable of actually
Las
providing this
relaciones con la
accompaniment.
CONAFOR, con otras
The relationship
instituciones
with
son clave
Forward with
para
other
poder abordar
agencies
estos
is
retos
key to actually address these
administrativos,
challenges,
pidiendo el
administrative
apoyo,
challenges,
incluso haciendo
requesting
gestiones
support
por la
and actually
interpretación de
processing
la
the
legislación o
interpretation
de las
of the
normas que
legislations or
permitiera dar
the standards that
flexibilidad
actually allow to
a que
actually
se pudieran
make this a bit more
contratar a los
flexible to
ejidos y
actually
comunidades.
hire
En
the
resumen,
local community
es
lands
importante
and communities.
revisar
So it's important to
lo que
actually
dicen las leyes
review what
con
the
respecto
law
a los
actually
procesos de
indicates in regards
contratación
to the
para poder estar en
hiring
la
and contracting
posibilidad de
process to
contratar,
be
en este
capable of
caso,
actually
a comunidades
hiring
locales
local communities
en la colecta de datos de campo. Gracias.
in the collection of
Muchas
field data.
gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank
Quisiera
you.
dirigir esta pregunta también para Víctor y para Armando, es decir, Panamá y
This question is
México.
for Victor and for Armando, Panama and
La
Mexico.
pregunta es,
See,
¿cómo
the
se
question is
garantiza
how do you
con la
guarantee
inclusión de las
with the inclusion
comunidades
of the
la
communities
rigurosidad
the rigor
requerida
the
para
required
algunos datos?
rigorosity to
Víctor.
collect data? Victor?
Bueno, al principio nosotros le damos un taller
At the beginning, we actually provide a workshop to the indigenous group on how to actually collect this data and also from the protection of the data that we actually want from the botanical and from the field part. So as I see said this,
hombres y mujeres tienen una capacidad
their women and men have a capacity because we actually saw that the agricultural student or agronomist and it wasn't very difficult to actually explain the situation because we work with the indigenous group of Noble, which is in the eastern part of the country, and this information was integrated into this, but logically we can continue because the connections that you mentioned before.
del trabajo.
But
Digamos,
a second proposal of this work,
tenemos que irlos a ubicar porque en
we
verdad son
need
de
to
mucha
actually
importancia
locate
para
them
el
because it's
desarrollo
very
del
important for
manejo
the
forestal
development of the
en
national
de todo el
forest
país,
inventories
conjuntamente con toda la
at
gente
the
indígena
countryside.
tenemos en el país, que son
So
aproximadamente
in the country we
son
have
seis unidades
approximately
indígenas, seis comarcas que tenemos.
about six regions
Armando, por
indigenous regions we
favor.
should have. Armando,
La misma pregunta.
same question, Armando.
¿Cómo se garantiza con la
So how do you
inclusión de las comunidades
ensure
la
the
rigurosidad
inclusion of
requerida para
the
algunos
communities,
datos?
the required rigorosity to
Gracias.
collect data?
Sí, como comenté,
Thinking I do, as I
hay
actually mentioned in my
etapas
presentation,
para
there's
poder
several
asegurar
stages to actually ensure
rigurosidad de la
the
colecta
rigorosity when
en
collecting
nuestro caso
data,
tiene
field
que ir
data.
desde la
In our
propia
case, has to
selección de
do
los
with
ejidos
the
y comunidades
selection
en el
of
sentido
the
de que
community lands and
buscamos ejidos y
communities
comunidades con
in
cierta
which you look for
experiencia
lands and communities with
en el
certain
manejo de los
experiences
datos
in the management of their own data, for example, that they're actually fully committed by their um, by their accounts to actually generate yearly reports on the production of the conditions of their forest. This truly helps those that they should have their adequate knowledge for this. Second, has to do with the establishment of workshops that allows us to actually to have the methods for data collection in the team that actually provide this training. You have the measurements adequately in the good use of the inclinometers to define the height and other instruments. The other part, we have the use of the open forest tool that she establishes these controls of verification to actually ensure that we won't see data that's not adequate for this. So we won't omit data so that this data can actually be validated with very simple rules that she allows to determine that these data is correct. Now, afterwards, this process on quality control, where we actually provide a supervision of the brigades in hot, as we actually mentioned. In other words, to accompany the brigades directly and to supervise how they collect data. And in this case, we can correct them if they have any issues, or to actually review this to go after the brigades actually collected data and to actually carry a selective measurements to corroborate the data that was collected. And if there's any significant difference, then we can actually establish the necessary mechanisms of uh, of the data that was collected. And all this process that once is if you have the information collected in the center server of Guanafor, we can actually review the data also in real time to see that these are consistent using the information from the inventory of the previous cycle of the inventory to see that the species and that number of trees is consistent with that what it was measured, and the accuracy in regards to the arrival of the coordinates at the site where they need to actually take that sample. So there's a whole established system to ensure the rigorosity in the data collection. And I do want to emphasize on this. It's key, independently of the participation of communities of or whoever it may be in the collection of field data. The issue of the quality of data is critical in the national forest inventory. Either community lands, or community like in Mexico, or other types of organizations or private enterprises. The quality must be first, and they must ensure in the same way in any case. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias. Para
Thank you
cerrar
so much to actually close this webinar.
una
I actually
general para los tres
want to
países
provide
y
a
quisiéramos
general
que sea
question for all three
Guatemala quien
countries,
inicie la
and
respuesta. ¿Qué
Guatemala can actually
mensaje
start.
darían a los
What message would
representantes
you
del
give
Inventario Forestal
to the
Nacional de
National
otros
Forest
países
Inventories
sobre la
authorities from other countries
integración de
on the
comunidades locales
integration
a
of
los
local
inventarios
communities into
forestales
the
nacionales?
National
Por
Forest
favor,
Inventories?
Dulce y Eliseo.
Dulce and Eliseo from Guatemala, you have the
Sí, mi
floor.
mensaje
Yes, my
y más
message
enfocado,
would
¿verdad? A todos
be a bit
aquellos
more
que
focused on
coordinan
all
inventarios
those that
forestales en
actually
sus
coordinate the
países que
national forest inventories in their countries,
durante la
that
planificación pues
during the
tomen en
planning
cuenta,
phase,
¿verdad?
they can
Cierta campaña de
consider to actually
divulgación
do a
previa, ¿verdad?
dissemination campaign or
Para poder,
dissemination
digamos,
campaign to
entrar a
actually
sus comunidades locales,
as you go
¿verdad?
into the local communities,
Digamos que tenga participación de la
and they
juventud, ¿verdad?
have the engagement
También,
of
como
the
lo
youth
decía
population.
Armando,
And
¿verdad?
just
Que
as Armando, she mentioned
hubiera también
that
algún
we could actually
participante
have
ya de edad
some
avanzada o de grupos, digamos, de
elderly
edades mayores para que
participants, or
hubiera esa
the
transmisión
elderly participation, so we can
intergeneracional,
have this
¿verdad? Y la información
intergenerational
que se
dialogue,
maneja desde los
and the
pueblos
information
indígenas,
is
¿verdad?
actually provided by
Entonces,
the
y
indigenous
también, pues,
people,
obviamente, la
and
inclusión de
also
las
the
mujeres y la
inclusion
participación
of
de
women,
de las
and
mujeres,
the
¿verdad?
inclusion
Para el
of
levantamiento de
women
datos,
for
que si bien,
the
digamos, es un
field
poco
data
complicado
collection,
llegar, digamos, a
that
esas
it
áreas
is
tan
quite
complicadas,
complicated to
¿verdad?
actually
Y
reach
fuera
these
estos
remote
espacios,
areas
¿verdad?
and outside of the
Somos
capital
capaces,
cities.
¿verdad? Y
And I
somos
think we're
capaces
capable of doing
porque
this. I think
tenemos,
we're
digamos,
capable of
la
doing this because
mística
we
del
have
trabajo y tenemos
um, that
la voluntad,
entrepreneurship and that will to actually do this, which is very important that women and also men can have that will of actually carrying out the collection of data that's of quality and information of quality and real information that we can actually report
Sí,
these
agregando
two
también
international commissions and
el
also to
dato
complement what as she
adicional que le quería
said
comentar, la
today,
estrategia de llegar a las
the
comunidades es muy
strategy
importante,
and
esa
to reach the community is very
socialización
important. That
y esa
socialization
comunicación con
of
las
that
comunidades
communities and
locales
communication with the
para
local
tenerlos como
communities that
aliados
actually have
en
them as
esta actividad
allies
de
of this
levantamiento de
activities
información de campo. Por ejemplo,
of field
esto
collection
creo
data. I
que
think
le
that this
da un
is
valor
actually
agregado
provides
a todo
added
el
value
inventario forestal en
to the
función de los
entire
aliados
national
locales, como
forest
decía,
inventories with the
y que
local
ellos también
allies
puedan
and that they
participar
can
a
actually
nivel de las
participate
comunidades
at the
adyacentes
community
a nuestra
level
unidad de muestreo
to
de
those sampling
levantamiento de
units.
información.
It
Es
actually
importante
collecting that information. It's very
transmisión
important
de
to
conocimiento
actually
intergeneracional que
convey
hablábamos,
that
es importante
intergenerational
ese
discussion.
transfer de
It's also
conocimiento
important
y socializarlo
to have that
a nivel local
socialization
para tener
at a
más
local
acceso
level,
a las
to have
comunidades
more
y poder
access to the communities,
levantar la
and to
información que se requiere.
actually
Pero como
collect
decía, lo
the necessary
importante aquí es
information. But
hacer
like I
aliados
mentioned,
locales,
the
¿verdad?
important is to
Para que
create
eso
local
nos ayude
allies so
mucho
that this can
en
actually
tener
helps us
mayor
to actually
información,
have
mejor
greater
información
information and better
y llegar a
information
estas unidades de
and
muestreo
to
como
actually
quisiéramos que
reach
fuera.
these communities
Gracias.
like we want to. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias. La misma
Thank you so
pregunta
much. The
para
same
la experiencia de
question
Panamá. ¿Cuál sería el
with
mensaje que
Panama
daría a
will
los
be the
responsables de los
message
inventarios
that the
forestales nacionales
inventory, national forest
de
inventory,
otros países sobre la
responsible from other
integración de
countries
las
on the
comunidades
integration
locales
of the
en
local
los
communities
inventarios
in the
forestales
inventory and
nacionales?
national forest
Sí,
inventories.
bueno, al principio nuestra la
Well, at the very
experiencia
beginning, our
es que
experience,
los
we
técnicos al
our
momento de hacer
technical
un
people,
levantamiento de una
when they
muestra
actually
X,
collected the
ya
data,
iban y
they
hacían el contacto con los
they
líderes locales,
actually
en donde
contacted
se les
the
comunica que iban a
local
estar en esa
communities
área para efectos de
of
permiso
that
para realizar
remote
el relevamiento
because of the local
los
permissions
municipios.
and by
En
the
ese sentido,
municipalities. In this regard,
nosotros, los peones o los jornaleros, eran de la comunidad.
the workers
Y
were
ganamos
from
un
the
sueldo
actual
ahí por la
community.
semana que estábamos
They
trabajando ahí.
actually
Esa es la
earned their
parte
weekly
cuando iban los
salary,
técnicos nuestros
and when our
locales
technical
donde nosotros hacíamos
people
levantamiento. En
um,
la parte
they actually did
de
this
las
with them.
empresas que
So,
contratamos
and
hace
the
2
companies
años,
that we actually hired
ellos
about 2 years
también tienen
ago,
que llevar un
they
personal
also had to take their own staff,
jornaleros que fueran de la
their
comunidad,
workers
para que
from
operaran
the
dentro de la
community.
comunidad e inclusive en un momento dado se les
As
enseñaba
a
a
matter of
ellos
fact,
a
we
hacer
actually
medición de
taught
los
them
árboles porque
how to actually do how
porque
to
pues
measure
era
trees,
el trabajo era muy
and
difícil
because
y
the
se les
work
enseñó a ellos
was
a
very
tomar
difficult, and
datos
so we taught them how
dentro de
to
las
actually
áreas.
collect this data
Y por último, las
within
comunidades
the area.
indígenas,
And
que es lo
lastly,
más
the
importante
indigenous
porque
community,
ahí sí se trabaja en base
it was very important
a
because it's actually
género.
based
Estas comunidades
on
tienen
gender, and these
una
communities
capacidad de
have
trabajo muy
a
interesante en el sentido de
capacity
que
of
la
work which is
organización que
quite
tienen
interesting.
les
The
permite a ellos hacer
organization
un
level
trabajo muy
allows them
eficiente.
to actually
Y
do
como eso,
a very rigorous
sí,
work,
como dijo Alani, nosotros damos toda
and
esa experiencia a ellos,
we
toda
actually
la
provide
experiencia
all
de
this
cómo
experience and all
desarrollan,
the expertise of
pero
how they
sí,
should do this.
la mayor cantidad
But
de ellos son, como dije
but
anteriormente,
most of
ya tienen una
them
experiencia
are actually
profesional
communities that actually
que es
have
de venir a
professional
repartir
experience.
en
They
otros países
actually
en esa área
they have
indígena,
proper
en
studies for
cuestiones
this. They're
agropecuarias
actually
y para el
engineers and they have
desarrollo
agricultural
de este tipo
schools
de
for the
formación.
development of this type of information from these groups.
Muchísimas gracias. Dejaría a Armando para que
Thank you so
cierre
much,
con algunas
Armando.
recomendaciones
Maybe you
a
guys can
los
close with
responsables
these
de los
same
inventarios
recommendations
forestales nacionales de otros
for
países
the
sobre
National
la
Forest Inventories from other
integración
countries
de
on
comunidades
the
locales
integration of
a los
local
inventarios
communities
forestales nacionales.
to the
Adelante,
National
Armando,
Forest
por favor.
Inventories. Armando, you have the floor.
Gracias, Naidu. Pues
Thank you,
básicamente
Naidu. Yes, basically
las negociaciones
the
internacionales
international
se ha
negotiations
establecido como uno de los
have
puntos
established
relevantes
as one of the most relevant
el hecho de
points
que la
uh, the
participación de las
the
comunidades locales
the participation of the
en
local communities
de datos, perdón, de datos, pero bueno, en la gestión en
of
general
data
de sus
for
recursos
in the
naturales
general
y su
management of the
desarrollo.
natural
Creo que
resources.
hay
I think
suficientes
that
muestras
there's
de
enough
participación
samples
donde las
that
comunidades locales
the
han
local
logrado
community
una adecuada
participation
gestión y
has
conservación de los
actually
recursos naturales.
managed to
Y en este sentido
preserve the
también
local
es relevante
resources.
que
And it's also very important to actually indicate that these local communities can actually participate in the monitoring of their own forest resources. And we will comply with this with the safeguards established by its different
¿no? Relacionados con la
multilateral
participación
agreements done by the local communities and the governance and the participation of their ways of life and the integration of the traditional knowledge. And I think that that local participation, particularly from the indigenous communities and communal lands and communities like in Mexico, will be very important to actually benefit the national forest inventories. Is for us a great challenge
gestores de estos
as
instrumentos
managers
de información, el poder
of
generar
these
esta
tools
cohesión
of information to integrate this
entre
vision
diseño e
within the
implementación de estos
design
planes. Entonces,
and
creo
implementation
que
of these
en términos
designs.
generales,
So I
pues
think in general
justo este
terms, I
tipo de
think that
conversatorios
this
en
type
una
of
red
conversations
regional nos
that
permite
a regional
justamente
network
discutir cómo
allows us
podemos
to actually
hacer
discuss how
esta
can we
mejor
actually
integración de las
do
comunidades
this
locales
better integration of the local
en la
communities
colecta de datos de campo,
in the
análisis
collection of
incluso de la
field data
información
and the analysis
de
of
esta información.
information of
Gracias.
this information. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias y muchas
Thank you
gracias a
so
los
much, and thank you so
representantes de los
much,
tres
the
países
representatives of the
por
three
su
countries, for
explicación, sus lecciones
your
aprendidas y por
lessons
estas
learned and
maravillosas
explanations,
intervenciones que han
and from the
realizado.
wonderful
Para
interventions that you carried
empezar
out.
a cerrarles
To
el
actually
webinar,
wrap
le
up this
daría
webinar, I
paso a mi
will
colega Carla
pass the
Ramírez
floor to
para
Carla
que
Ramirez
nos dé las
so she
conclusiones
can actually
principales
give us
y
the
nos
final closing
indique cuáles
remarks
serían los
and to indicate
siguientes
exactly
pasos o
what are
qué
the next
oportunidades
steps or what
tendríamos.
other opportunities
Adelante,
do
Carla,
we
por
have.
favor.
Carla, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Naidu. Muchas
Thank you so much,
gracias,
Naidu.
Armando,
Thank you so much,
Eliseo,
Armando,
Dulce,
Eliseo,
Víctor,
Dulce,
por
Victor,
sus
for
participaciones
your
también a David,
participation, and
por este
David,
apoyo que se está
for this
brindando
tremendous
a estas
support that you're
iniciativas
providing to
del
these
programa
initiatives
InfoForest.
from the
Bueno, yo
InfoForce
quisiera,
program.
para
I
cerrar este
do,
evento,
in order to wrap up with this
hacer como
webinar
unas,
and to
unas
actually have
conclusiones y
some general
resaltar algunos
conclusions and to
mensajes. Por
highlight some
ejemplo,
key
el
messages,
mensaje
um, like the
señor
message
Meneses
from
sobre
Mr.
la
Meneses on
participación local
the
porque
local
eleva la
participation
legitimidad y sostenibilidad de las
because it
decisiones de la
elevates
gestión
the
pública y
legitimacy
basada
and
en la justicia
sustainability
y
of this
oportunidad.
community from
Realmente
prompt and accurate information. I think
esta
that this or
participación
this
va a
participation
transformar cómo
actually
hacemos los
transforms
inventarios
how we
forestales.
actually carry out
Quiero
the
resaltar
national forest
también lo que
inventories.
mencionó
I also want to
Armando,
highlight what
es
Armando
que
she
estamos
mentioned
también
that
en un momento
we're
clave,
also at
¿verdad?
a
Donde
key moment in
una época
time
donde existen
and
ya
in a
muchos
time where we
profesionales y
have a
técnicos
lot
en
of
las
professionals
comunidades, es
and technical
decir,
people
es
in the communities.
posible
In other words, it
romper ese
is possible
paradigma
to actually break away this
no
paradigm
podemos trabajar
that
técnicamente con la
that
población
they
local.
can't do this. We
Entonces
can't
eso
work
creo yo que es
technically
bastante
with the local community. So I
importante
think it's very important
como mensaje
um,
para
as
todos
a key
nuestros
message
colegas
for all of our
que se
colleagues
encargan de
that are actually
implementar estos
responsible to actually
programas en el
implement
campo de los inventarios
um,
forestales.
the data collection
Actualmente
of the
ya
national forest
las
inventories.
comunidades
Now,
también
currently,
están
the
más habituadas
communities
al uso de la
are actually
tecnología
used to
y
the
eso
use of
creo yo
technology,
que
and I believe that
apoya.
this
Estamos en este momento
actually right now we're at this key
también
moment, like as you
resaltar
mentioned.
experiencia
I also
de
want to
Panamá
highlight that experience from
porque
Panama because
esas capacitaciones de
from
ese
that training,
trabajo
from
con las
that
comunidades
work
también
with the communities.
permitió que ellos
We also
recibieran
had the fact that I
a los
remember
grupos
that
de la
that
comunidad
the a
Noble
team from
Buglé
the Nove
precisamente a Guatemala a enseñar a
Bugle
utilizar
team
drones
actually went
y
to
formó
Guatemala
parte de
on how
todo
to
ese
use
proceso, o sea,
drones,
altamente
and that was part of the
tecnológico
process of the
incluso
high tech use between
quería
indigenous
resaltar esas
people,
palabras
and
que
that's why
mencionó
you want to
Armando.
highlight
Luego también
that comment.
sobre la
Also,
estrategia que ya
on the
Guatemala
strategy that
está en camino,
Guatemala is actually been
sin duda
using,
que van a superar
without a
muchos
doubt, they were
de
actually
esos desafíos
overcome
mencionados,
many of these challenges that we actually mentioned,
principalmente
mainly in
Dulce
the
mencionaba
Dulce actually
algo
mentioned
como es la
um,
mística, ¿no? La
something like
mística de
the
ir más allá
the will of
de
actually
los
going
análisis
beyond of
y
just using
también de
technologies, but
conocer
of
realmente de
actually
cerca los
knowing
bosques y con
about
la
the
gente
forest
que
and with
vive
the
ahí. Yo creo
people
que ese
that
es un
actually live there. I
trabajo
think that
que
this is
nosotros los que
something
hemos
that
trabajado en inventarios
those of us who
forestales
actually worked in
nos encanta, ¿no?
national
Y
forest inventories, we love to see this
trabajar con
and
ellos
that to
hace
work with
aún
them
mucho más
is going to be even greater. The inclusion of women and youth, as it was mentioned, I think this is part of all these processes really helps to actually empower the communities so they can continue to actually manage their forests and to support in its own conservation. I also found I saw the video and Armando's message at the very end, which actually being part of the national forest inventories is is a point of pride for a country because generating that data to preserve the forest not just from the country but around the world to actually maintain the our life on this planet Earth. Also, I want to highlight that the active inclusion of communities is a right. I believe that this is very important to actually mention this, and that in one way or another, the process of collecting data can also comply to that social safeguarding, which is being discussed in international forums and meetings related to the local engagement and the participation of youth and women, particularly in the monitoring, verification, and reporting because of deforestation and degradation of forests. Because it's one of the main focuses of which we have continued developing the national forest inventories. And last but not least, that without the guardians of the forest, all these local people, uh, these conservation goals will not be able to be possible. They actually help the world to ensure that more resilient and equitable future of generations. So thank you so much once again, all the panel and the panelists, and I do for that excellent moderation. We hope that this event is of your pleasing, and hopefully it broaden your knowledge and the opportunities of improving the national forest inventories of the country. So thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a ti,
Thank you so much,
esa
Carla,
síntesis
for that summary and conclusions that you have provided. To close this meeting, I'll pass the floor to Armando Linares, President of the National Forest for Latin America and the Caribbean, so he can give us his closing remarks. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Naidu. And on behalf of the network of National Forest Inventories for Latin America and the Caribbean, I truly want to thank everyone that connected to this conversation for your participation. The intention of this conversation is to promote dialogue and the exchange of knowledge and experiences that allow countries from the region to actually explore new techniques and innovations and focuses for the implementation of national forest inventories. So this network was created with that purpose, where the international cooperation, particularly from the South-South cooperation, can actually help to consider better national forest inventories to have better tools, better supplies, and analysis tools. And I believe that this conversation in particular will contribute to actually have that improvement of the national forest inventories. The local engagement, as God actually mentioned, in addition to responding to the rights of the communities to improve the management of natural resources and the forest resources, also actually allows us as a country to legitimize the information that's collected on the national forest inventories. By saying that this network, we're actually focusing on carrying out analysis to actually harmonize data at the regional level. Particularly, one of the most relevant efforts has been the formulation of a book on the national forest inventories in Latin America and the Caribbean that actually gathers all the information which is current on the inventories in our country and how these are carried out, what methodologies and what design. All this very relevant information for those who want to understand what does a national inventory entails and what information is collected and how does it actually analyze. So in this sense, I just want to thank every single one of you for your participation, and I want to thank the colleagues from FAO at the regional level and the representation of Mexico for your support in organizing this seminar. I want to thank the members of the network for your participation, particularly I want to thank Guatemala, Panama for your collaboration, and also FAO from central offices and for your participation. And to say that we hope that this is an event which is not just one, but hopefully it's the beginning of some other collaborative actions and technical actions that we create within the network, especially to actually support the dissemination of what this network actually does between the general public by seeking more people related to the implementation of a national forest inventory. So with this, I want to thank everyone, and we thank everyone for your participation, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thank you. Bye.